$100K if you can outdesign me, Richard Whitmore said as he pointed straight at Annie. Right here, right now. Hundreds of eyes turned at once toward Annie Carter. Annie froze, as if she had misheard her own name. Me? She asked softly. I only work backstage. Why, me? She was standing near the backstage door, one arm wrapped around a basket of fabric scraps, the other hand still holding a spool of black thread. Taylor's chalk dust clung to the front of her white shirt. She did not look like a designer. Yes, I'm talking to you, girl, Richard said. Now hurry up and get out here. An assistant standing beside Annie tugged lightly at her sleeve. Annie, don't answer. Just keep your head down and walk out. Richard's mouth curved. What's wrong? He said. You just said the shoulder on my coat was too stiff. Now the whole room can hear you. Step out here and prove it to me. Come on, Annie, he said. He knew her name now because someone had whispered it to him. You spend all day picking up scraps. Let's see if scraps are all you're good for. I didn't mean to insult you, Annie said quietly. Didn't mean to? Richard laughed. A temporary worker. Someone who hasn't even been cleared to touch an official sketch. Stands backstage and critiques my design. Scattered laughter moved through the room. Annie looked at the silver-white suit resting beneath the lights. It was the centerpiece of the night, the piece Richard had called his masterpiece of the year. The jacket was sharp at first glance, expensive and cold, but the left shoulder sat too high. Annie hesitated. I only thought, if the inner construction under the left shoulder was released, and the excess fabric was turned down toward the waist, the whole piece would move better. Richard burst out laughing. Do you hear that? He said, turning to the guests. She actually thinks she knows how to save my design. An investor in the front row leaned toward the man beside him. Who is that girl? Just a temp, the man whispered back. I think she works backstage cleanup. Richard spread one hand toward the room, enjoying the attention now. And because Whitmore House believes in opportunity, I'm going to give this backstage temporary worker a chance to shine. He looked back at Annie, the mockery clear in his eyes. Young lady, show me your talent with that discarded coat. Richard stepped closer. You understand the offer, don't you? He asked, almost kindly. $100,000. More than you'll make in years pressing other people's clothes. Annie's grip tightened around the spool. The thread cut lightly into her palm. Tasha Reed, the independent fashion reporter who had been filming behind the second row, raised her phone higher. Richard noticed and smiled toward it. He liked cameras. He lifted the coat for everyone to see. This was removed from the show because it didn't meet my standard. But apparently Miss Carter here believes she knows better than the house that employed her for 3 weeks. He let the words settle. So let's give her a chance. I didn't say I knew better, Annie said. Richard tilted his head. No, I fixed a pull in the shoulder. That's all. That's all, he repeated, turning toward the crowd as if she had delivered the punchline for him. She fixed a pull in the shoulder. Richard misread her silence. What's wrong? Too much pressure? I thought talent was talent. Marissa Lane, the lead model, stood near the changing screen wearing a robe over runway heels. She had been the first to see the coat after Annie touched it. Richard, she said low, enough. Mr. Whitmore, we're about to begin the main introduction. A production coordinator added carefully. Maybe this should stop here. He did not look at either of them. No, Marissa, this is educational. He turned back to Annie. Fashion is not a neighborhood sewing circle. It is discipline, taste, training, history. It is not something you pick up between ironing hems and fetching coffee. He repeated her name. Annie, he said, drawing it out. Before you judge my work, tell us, where did you study design? Parsons? Fit? London? Paris? Nowhere, right? Someone in the design team gave a small laugh. She probably learned in the laundry room. Annie tightened her hold on the basket of scraps. I learned from my father. Richard raised an eyebrow. And who is your father? Some zipper repairman on a street corner. Annie looked at him. He's a tailor. A tailor? Richard laughed louder. Child, a tailor is not a designer. Don't confuse needles and thread with art. Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she did not let it become tears. She set the spool of thread on the table. The small sound of wood against metal seemed louder than it should have. Richard noticed. His smile sharpened. Careful. If you lose, you apologize for touching work that was above you, and you leave this building tonight. Quietly, someone in the crowd murmured, "This is going too far." Annie looked again at the coat. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she did not need to look. She already knew. Annie raised her eyes to Richard. "And if I do?" she asked. Richard blinked once, as if the question had reached him a half-second late. "If you do what?" "If I outdesign you." Richard recovered quickly. Men like him always did until they couldn't. "Then I'll pay you," he said. "And I'll apologize in front of everyone." Tasha's phone stayed fixed on his face. Annie nodded once. Her hands were no longer shaking. That surprised her. It seemed to surprise Richard, too. He held out the coat with 2 fingers. Annie did not take it right away. She looked at the scissors lying on the cutting table, the heavy silver pair no one had trusted her to use all week. Then she looked back at Richard Whitmore, at his perfect suit, his perfect smile, and all the silence he had purchased over the years. "Give me the scissors," she said. "Don't do it," the assistant whispered. "He wants you to become the joke." Annie took the scissors, her eyes still on the old coat. Then he should have picked an easier joke. Richard laughed into the microphone. "Did you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? Our little scrap girl talks back, too." He turned toward the crowd as if he had just offered them dessert after dinner. "Apparently, tonight we've been given a bonus performance. A girl who picks up fabric believes she can do better than me." Laughter rose again. Annie said quietly, "I don't want to perform." Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to escape the microphone. "No. You don't want to be exposed as someone who only knows how to whisper behind people's backs." Annie lifted her eyes. "I wasn't whispering behind your back. I said it because the design could be better." The air changed. A few laughs died where they started. Richard stared at her. "Fine." He pointed toward the old black coat hanging on the rack. A rejected sample with bad structure and a ruined back panel. "You have a little time to prove it. Use that piece of trash. If you can turn it into something more worth looking at than my design, I'll transfer you $100,000 right here." Annie was not shaking. She was not looking at the floor. She walked straight toward the outdated black coat, as if she had seen its true shape long before anyone else had bothered to look. A reporter raised her phone. "Are you serious, Mr. Whitmore?" Richard smiled coldly. "I never joke about money." Annie looked at the old coat. The shoulder was crooked. The waist was too wide. The back tail had been cut wrong. To most people, it was garbage. Something thrown away isn't always worthless. Sometimes it just hasn't met the right hands. "Annie say," Richard gave a louder laugh. "An arrogant young girl," he said. "Remember this. If you fail, you walk out of here. And you will never get a chance to sew another piece of clothing in this industry again." She took the coat from Richard. He released it with a small flick of his fingers. "Clock starts when you cut," he said. The scissors were heavier than Annie expected, not because of the steel. One cut, and she would no longer be the quiet temp girl who came in early, stayed late, and disappeared before anyone remembered to say thank you. If you have ever felt invisible like Annie, please like this video to show her some love. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because someone near you might be watching this story too. And if you want more emotional and inspiring stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. She carried the coat to the fitting platform where Marissa Lane stood waiting. Marissa looked at her, not with pity, but with a question. "You sure?" Marissa asked. "No," Annie said. Marissa gave the smallest nod. "Good. Sure, people usually ruin clothes." That almost made Annie smile. Phones rose higher. The production coordinator glanced toward the runway curtain, then toward the giant digital clock counting down to the main introduction. Annie set the coat against Marissa's shoulders without putting the sleeves fully on. She had learned that from her father. Never force the body into the garment first. The left shoulder pulled forward exactly as she had seen before. The lapel dragged the chest down. The lining was beautiful, but hidden. Wasted inside the coat, Richard tapped his watch. "We don't have all night." "You gave me a minute," Annie said without looking up. "Marissa," she said, "stand natural. Don't pose." Marissa dropped one hip, relaxed her shoulders. "No," Annie said, "not runway natural, real natural." Marissa looked at her. Then her shoulders softened. Her breath changed. The coat immediately showed the problem. Annie heard someone behind her whisper, "She knows what she's doing." Richard heard it too. Annie placed the scissor tip under the hidden stitch at the shoulder and opened it with one clean motion. "Careful," Richard said. "She's ruined it," someone muttered. Richard laughed loudly. "That's your design?" he said. "Cut blindly and pray?" Fabric did not lie. People did. Richard moved closer. He had not expected Marissa Lane to look like the coat had been designed for her all along. Annie still held the scissors at her side. "How much time?" Tasha asked from behind her phone. The production coordinator looked at the clock, stunned. 15 seconds. No one laughed then. Annie turned to Richard, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "You said if I out-designed you," she said, "you'd pay. I never wanted to perform or judge you," Annie added, her voice still low. "But if I did what you said I couldn't do, then you need to keep your promise." Richard looked at the coat, then at the crowd, then back at Annie. For the first time that night, his smile had to work hard to stay on his face, and somewhere in that room, someone older than the rest drew in a sharp breath, because she had seen that turn of the shoulder before. The woman who drew in that breath was Eleanor Briggs. She stood near the second row of backstage guests, one hand resting on the head of her cane, the other pressed against the pearl buttons of her jacket. She was 67, with silver hair cut at her jaw, and the posture of someone who had spent half her life correcting younger people without raising her voice. Most of the room knew her, or at least knew enough to lower their voices when she passed. Eleanor had built garments for names that still hung in museums. She had taught young designers how to respect seams before they dared call themselves artists. Now she was staring at Marissa's shoulder as if the old black coat had spoken a dead man's name. Richard noticed her expression before anyone else did. "Eleanor," he said lightly, too lightly, "don't tell me you're impressed by a loose stitch and a lucky fold." Eleanor did not answer him. She stepped closer to Marissa, slowly, careful with the cane but not weak. Her eyes moved from the open shoulder to the turned front panel, then down to the way Annie had pulled the waisted fabric toward the waist without killing the coat's balance. Her mouth tightened. "Walk," Eleanor said to Marissa. Marissa glanced at Annie. Annie gave a small nod. Marissa took 3 steps down the strip of open floor between the cutting tables and the curtain. With each step, the coat moved differently. The bad weight was gone. The old lining cut through the black wool in a clean flash. The crooked shoulder no longer looked like a mistake. It looked intentional, alive, almost defiant. People who had laughed minutes ago leaned forward without meaning to. Eleanor's eyes did not leave the garment. "Turn halfway," she said. Marissa turned. The back tail, damaged and uneven before, now fell at an angle that made the whole coat sharper. It was not finished. It was not polished. But anyone with taste could see the idea, and anyone with training could see the hand behind it. "That isn't luck," Eleanor said. Richard's smile thinned. "No one said it was luck. I'm sure Miss Carter has hemmed plenty of choir robes." A few people laughed, but the sound died quickly because Eleanor did not smile. She looked at Annie. "Who taught you to release a shoulder that way?" Annie's hand tightened around the scissors. "My father." "What's his name?" Richard shifted. It was small, but Annie saw it. So did Eleanor. "Samuel Carter," Annie said. For the first time that night, the room did not know what to do with the silence. The name meant nothing to many of the younger assistants. They looked around, waiting for a cue, but a handful of older guests reacted. A buyer in a gray dress lowered her glass. A retired pattern chief near the wall blinked twice and straightened. Someone whispered, "Carter?" As if the word had been locked away for years and had just slipped out by accident. Eleanor closed her eyes for half a second. "I knew it," she said. Richard laughed once, hard and sharp. "You knew nothing." Eleanor turned to him. "I knew that shoulder." "That shoulder?" Richard said. "Eleanor, please. Don't make this embarrassing." It was called the Carter turn. Annie's face changed before she could stop it. She had heard the phrase only at home, never outside Brooklyn, never from someone wearing pearls in a room like this. Her father said it as a joke sometimes, when she copied him well enough to make him proud. "Careful with that, Annie. That's the Carter turn." But he always said it softly, as if pride was dangerous when spoken too loud. Richard took a step forward. "There is no such thing." Eleanor did not look away. "There was." Tasha Reed moved closer, phone still recording. Miss Briggs, are you saying Annie's technique belongs to her father? I'm saying I saw Samuel Carter do that 22 years ago before half this room knew how to thread a machine. Eleanor's voice stayed calm, but something underneath it had gone hard. He could take a dead shoulder and make it breathe. He could turn fabric without forcing it. He understood balance better than men who took credit for his work. Richard's face changed. Not enough for the crowd, maybe, but enough for Annie. He stopped looking amused. Careful, he said. Eleanor gave him a tired look. That word again. Funny how often powerful men say it when the truth gets near them. A murmur passed through the room. Richard turned toward the guests, trying to regain the rhythm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is becoming sentimental nonsense. Samuel Carter was dismissed from this industry for a reason. A documented reason. Annie felt the words hit her body before she understood them. She had heard versions of that sentence all her life. In old articles, in whispers from customers who recognized her father's name, in the way some people asked, wasn't he the one who stole from Whitmore House? And then pretended they had only been curious. My father didn't steal, Annie said. Richard looked at her with a softness that was worse than anger. Child, you were barely born. And you were there, she said. The room went still again. Tasha's phone did not move. Richard's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you accusing me of? Annie wanted to answer. But the truth was that she did not know enough. She knew her father's hands. She knew his silence. She knew the cigar box under the counter at Carter Alterations, where he kept old clippings and one folded photograph he never explained. She knew how he turned off the television whenever Richard Whitmore appeared on a fashion segment. But knowing pain was not the same as proving what caused it. Eleanor seemed to understand that. She's not accusing you, Eleanor said. Not yet. Richard gave her a cold smile. You're retired, Eleanor. Don't spend your remaining reputation on a ghost story. The cruelty in that sentence landed harder than his jokes had. Several people looked away. Marissa's jaw tightened. Annie could feel the coat still on Marissa's shoulders, proof standing in the room while Richard tried to talk it back into nothing. A young man from the design team stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, we really need to move. The intro is in 3 minutes. Richard did not take his eyes off Eleanor. Then move. The young man froze. Get the model out of that thing. Put her in the finale look. Now. Marissa did not move. Richard turned to her. Marissa. She held his stare. The coat works. The coat is not in the show. It should be. A few people sucked in air. Nobody talked to Richard that way in public. Not while under contract. Not with cameras nearby. Richard's voice dropped. You are paid to wear what I tell you to wear. Marissa looked down at the coat, then at Annie. And tonight she made it worth wearing. Annie's throat tightened. Not because she felt safe. She did not. The room was still Richard's. The staff still feared him. The checks still came from his company. But for the first time, somebody inside that world had chosen not to leave her standing alone. Eleanor stepped closer to Annie and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Do you have any of your father's old work? Annie hesitated. He keeps things. Sketches. Clippings. I don't know everything. Find them, Eleanor said. And don't let anyone in this building take that coat from you without a camera on it. Richard clapped once, sharp enough to make people jump. Show starts in 2 minutes. Everyone back to work. Miss Carter, your little demonstration is over. Tasha lowered her phone just an inch. Mr. Whitmore, are you paying her? He turned slowly. For what? Damaging a sample? You made an offer on camera. His smile returned, but it looked thinner now, stretched over something mean. I offered payment if she outdesigned me. That has not been established by any serious standard, Eleanor said. It has been established by everyone with eyes. The crowd shifted. Someone near the back whispered, Pay her. Another voice repeated it. Softer. Richard heard both. Annie saw it, in the way his cheek moved. He leaned toward Annie, his voice low. You should have stayed invisible. Annie looked at Marissa in the coat, at Eleanor's steady face, at Tasha's red recording light. Then she looked back at Richard. My father tried that, she said. It didn't save him. Richard's words stayed in the air, but Annie's answer changed what they meant. For a moment, Nobody backstage moved. The runway music pulsed beyond the curtain, low and rehearsed, but the people closest to Annie seemed to hear something else now. Not gossip, not entertainment. A crack in the floor beneath a beautiful room. Richard straightened first. Men like him recovered fast because the world had trained them to expect recovery. "Enough," he said. "We have a show to run." He snapped his fingers toward the wardrobe team. 2 assistants stepped forward, then slowed when Marissa did not move. She still wore the black coat Annie had altered. Her shoulders relaxed inside it, her face calm in a way that made Richard look louder without raising his voice. "Take it off," Richard said. Marissa looked at Annie, then at Eleanor, then back to him. "No." The word was small, but the room heard it. Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. "You are under contract." "I'm aware." "Then behave like it." Marissa's mouth tightened. "I've behaved for 8 years. I've worn dresses that hurt, shoes that cut, jackets pinned so tight I couldn't breathe, and smiled because men like you called it discipline." She touched the lapel of the black coat. "This is the first thing tonight that feels like it was made for a human body." A murmur moved through the room. Richard's eyes sharpened. "Do not confuse a sentimental moment with a career." Marissa gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You confuse fear with loyalty." The production coordinator stepped between them, pale and sweating under his headset. "Mr. Whitmore, we are 90 seconds from the main introduction. Then put another model in the finale look." The finale look is already on standby, but the press line has shifted. They're asking about the coat. Richard turned. "What press line?" The coordinator swallowed. "Tasha's stream is spreading." Tasha Reed did not lower her phone. She stood near a rack of garment bags, one shoulder against the wall, recording everything with the steady patience of someone who knew better than to interrupt evidence while it was forming. Richard pointed at her. "Turn that off." "I'm press," Tasha said. "You were approved to cover the runway, not manufacture a scene backstage." "You manufactured it, Mr. Whitmore. I'm just keeping the camera still." A few people made sounds they tried to hide. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Damn." Richard's face did not redden, it drained. Anger in men like him often looked cold first. "Security," he said. 2 guards near the side door looked at each other. One took a step, then stopped when half the phones in the room shifted toward him. Tasha's live stream had become protection. Not perfect protection, not justice, but enough light to make people hesitate before doing what they might have done in a hallway. Eleanor Briggs tapped her cane once against the floor. "Richard, if you remove that reporter now, the story becomes larger than the coat." He turned on her. "And if you continue this performance, Eleanor, you'll be remembered as a woman who mistook nostalgia for judgment. I would rather be remembered for nostalgia than cowardice." The words landed clean. Annie watched the older woman's face and saw no victory there, only fatigue. Eleanor was not enjoying this. That made Annie trust her more. Richard looked back at the coat, then at Annie. "You think this makes you special?" "No," Annie said. "Good, because it doesn't. One trick with a rejected sample doesn't make you a designer. I never said it did. You didn't have to. Everyone here is desperate for a little morality play. Poor girl, rich man. One lucky cut, and suddenly they think they've witnessed genius." Annie felt the old instinct rise. Apologize, shrink, get out before damage spreads. It had carried her through school offices, apartment lease renewals, subway stairs, and every day at Whitmore House when someone handed her trash without looking at her face. But the coat was still on Marissa. Eleanor had said her father's name. Tasha was recording. The room was no longer Richard's alone. "I saw what was wrong," Annie said. "I fixed what I could." Richard leaned closer. "You touched my work. You threw it away. That still makes it mine." Annie looked at the coat. "Then maybe you should have known what it was worth." The silence after that was dangerous. Richard smiled again, but it had no warmth left. "You have your father's arrogance." Annie's chest tightened. "You knew him. I knew of him. That's not what you said with your face." For the first time, Richard had no immediate answer. Eleanor looked from Richard to Annie. "Samuel worked for Whitmore House before it was Whitmore House." back when Richard was still trying to turn his family money into taste. Richard's head snapped toward her. Stop. No. Eleanor's voice did not rise. I should have said more then. I won't repeat that mistake tonight. The production coordinator's headset crackled. We're live in 30, someone said through the speaker at his ear. He looked like a man watching two trains approach the same crossing. Beyond the curtain, the announcer began welcoming guests to the Whitmore House presentation. Applause rolled in from the main hall, polished and unaware. The show had started whether Richard wanted control or not. Richard inhaled through his nose. Marissa, final warning, remove that coat. Marissa did not. Instead, she turned to Annie. Can I walk in it? Annie stared at her. It isn't finished. Neither is the truth, apparently. Eleanor's eyes softened for half a second. Richard laughed once. You will not take that thing onto my runway. Marissa looked at the production coordinator. What's after the introduction? The opening black sequence, he said before he could stop himself. Put me at the end of it. Richard pointed at him. Do not. The coordinator froze. Phones stayed up. Tasha's red recording light held steady. Somewhere behind Annie, a young assistant whispered, Let her walk. Then another voice said it. Let her walk. It spread, not loud enough to become a chant, but enough to become a choice. Annie turned and saw faces she had passed all week without being seen. The woman who steamed gowns until her hands blistered, the intern who ran coffee trays in heels too high for work, the older dresser who kept safety pins in her sleeve. None of them stepped fully forward. Not yet. But their eyes had changed. Richard saw it too. Power did not always disappear at once. Sometimes it thinned in public, and that was worse for a man who needed people to believe it was solid. Fine, he said at last. The words surprised everyone. He turned toward Tasha's camera and smiled like the decision had been his idea. Let the audience see it. Let them decide whether a damaged sample and a sentimental story can stand beside real design. Annie knew he had not surrendered. He had adjusted. He believed the main audience would choose him. The name, the money, the house. He believed applause could be trained. Marissa stepped behind a screen to secure the coat for runway movement. Annie followed, because the side seam still needed one pin to hold through a walk. Her hands moved quickly, but now the shaking had returned, not fear of fabric. Fear of what came after. Marissa noticed. Hey, Annie looked up. You did the hard part. No, Annie said. The hard part is when people decide whether they saw it or not. Marissa studied her for a second. Your father teach you that? My father taught me people can look right at a thing and still call it something else. Before Marissa could answer, Eleanor stepped into the narrow space between the garment racks. She held out a small silver pin from her own lapel. Use this. Annie hesitated. Miss Briggs, I can't take that. You can return it when the coat comes back. If it comes back, Eleanor's gaze sharpened. It will. Tasha is filming. Half the room is filming. For once, let the cameras do something useful. Annie took the pin and secured the waist where the inner loop carried the strain. Her fingers brushed the lining. And for one strange second, she thought of her father's shop in Brooklyn. The narrow mirror, the coffee can of buttons, Samuel's old shears lying beside the register. He had no idea what was happening in Manhattan. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was worse. The opening music rose. Models began moving through the curtain one by one. Black coats, black dresses, polished boots, blank faces. Richard stood near the monitor, watching the audience reaction with his arms folded. He looked composed again, but Annie saw his hand flex once at his side. The coordinator looked at Marissa. You're next after number 7. Marissa nodded. Annie stepped back. Eleanor leaned close to her and spoke softly. When she walks, watch Richard, not the audience. Why? Because the guilty always recognize the shape of what they buried. Marissa moved to the curtain. The black coat caught the light at the shoulder, the silver lining flashing once like a blade being drawn. The model ahead of her cleared the runway. The coordinator lifted his hand. Go. Marissa stepped out. Marissa did not rush. That was the first thing Annie noticed from behind the curtain. Most models moved fast when the room felt uncertain. They trusted speed to carry them past judgment. Marissa did the opposite. She let the runway take her weight one step at a time, shoulders loose, chin level, the altered black coat moving with her instead of against her. The silver lining flashed when she turned slightly under the lights. Not loud, not desperate, just enough to make the front row lean in. The audience had been polite through the first 7 looks. Polite applause, polite faces, polite approval from people who knew how to praise luxury without feeling anything. But when Marissa appeared, the quiet changed. It thickened. A woman in the second row lowered her program. A buyer from Chicago sat forward. Someone whispered, "That wasn't in the preview." Richard stood beside the monitor with his arms crossed. Eleanor had told Annie to watch him, and now she understood why. His eyes did not go to the audience first. They went to the shoulder, then to the waist, then to the angled fall of the back panel. His face stayed controlled, but the skin around his mouth tightened. He recognized it. Annie felt that recognition before she had words for it. It was not the reaction of a man watching a bad garment embarrass itself. It was the reaction of a man seeing an old door open in a house he thought he had locked. Marissa reached the end of the runway and stopped. She did not pose the way Richard trained his models to pose, cold and distant, one hip forward, eyes above the crowd. She stood naturally, just as Annie had asked backstage. The coat settled around her body. The crooked sample had become something human and sharp at the same time. It looked less like wealth and more like survival dressed well. Then Marissa turned. The damaged back tail, the part Richard had called trash, now cut across the light in a clean diagonal. It gave the coat movement, almost a shadow of wings. The audience saw it at the same time. A sound passed through the room, not applause yet, but the small intake of breath that comes before people decide whether they are allowed to be honest. Tasha Reed moved from backstage toward the side aisle, phone still lifted. Her live stream comments climbed too fast for her to read, but a few kept repeating on the screen. "Who designed that? That coat is better than the collection. Pay the girl." Annie stood half hidden behind a rack of black garments. Her palms were damp. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt exposed. The coat was no longer just fabric. It carried her father's hand, her own hand, and a question Richard Whitmore clearly wanted buried. Behind her, one of the younger assistants whispered, "It's beautiful." Another answered, "Don't say that too loud." Eleanor Briggs stepped beside Annie. "Look at the front row." Annie did. The same investor who had asked who she was now leaned toward his companion, no longer amused. A fashion editor with red glasses was typing quickly. An older black woman in pearls wiped under one eye and pretended she was adjusting her makeup. Even those who did not understand construction understood that something had shifted. "Why is he looking at it like that?" Annie asked. Eleanor kept her eyes on Richard. "Because your father's work had a memory." On the runway, Marissa began walking back. The applause started with one person near the aisle, then another, then a few more. It was not the thunder reserved for celebrity finales. Not yet, but it was real, and that made it more dangerous. Real applause cannot be bought as easily as polite applause. Richard heard it. His shoulders lowered a fraction, and Annie saw him make a decision. "Cut the lights after she exits," he said to the coordinator. The coordinator blinked. "Sir? Cut the lights. Move straight to the finale film." "But the transition." "Do it." Eleanor's face hardened. "He's trying to swallow the moment." Annie stepped forward without thinking. "He can't just—" "He can," Eleanor said, "unless someone stops the story from being rewritten." Marissa came through the curtain, breathing hard, eyes bright. "Did you hear them?" Before Annie could answer, 2 wardrobe assistants rushed toward her, reaching for the coat. "Mr. Whitmore wants it pulled," one said. Marissa stepped back. "No, it's company property." Annie moved between them and the coat. "Don't touch it." The assistant looked embarrassed. "Annie, please, don't make this harder." It got hard when he made a bet in front of cameras. Richard arrived then, walking fast but not people. Men like him did not run in public. "Take off the coat, Marissa. Pay her," Marissa said. His eyes flicked to Tasha's phone. "This isn't a courtroom." "No," Tasha said from behind the camera, "but it is live." Richard turned toward her. "You are enjoying this far too much. I'm doing my job. Your job is to report fashion." "This is fashion." That brought another murmur from the backstage crowd. Richard looked at Annie. You think a few claps make this a victory? No, Annie said. You said if I made it worth looking at. I said if you outdesigned me. Eleanor stepped closer. She did. Richard laughed through his nose. By whose standard? Mine, Eleanor said. And if you want, I'll say that on camera. Richard looked at her with open contempt now. You always did have a weakness for lost causes. And you always had a talent for making them. The words hit him. Annie saw it. For a second, Richard was no longer the polished man under runway lights. He was younger, cornered, angry at someone remembering a version of the past he had spent money sanding down. Then the main screen in the hall changed. The finale film began early, a black and white video of Richard sketching in his private studio, his hand moving across thick paper, his voiceover speaking about legacy, discipline, and the courage to create. The audience turned toward the screen. The lights dimmed. Richard had covered the runway with his own myth. Backstage, nobody spoke. Annie watched the screen from the side monitor. Richard's recorded voice filled the hall. True design begins with authorship. A garment must carry the soul of the one who imagined it. Eleanor gave a bitter little smile. Of course he picked those words. Annie looked at her. What happened to my father? Eleanor did not answer quickly. The finale film continued, showing old photos of Whitmore House, magazine covers, celebrity fittings, Richard shaking hands with donors. Then, for less than a second, an archival image flashed across the screen. A younger Richard in a workroom, standing beside a half-finished white jacket on a dress form. Behind him, partly cut off by the frame, was a black man in shirt sleeves, his head turned away, one hand resting on the garment's shoulder. Annie's breath caught. Wait, she said. Tasha heard her and turned the camera toward the monitor. What? That's my father. Eleanor leaned in. Her face went still. The image was gone, replaced by Richard, at a gala years ago, smiling beside a celebrity. But Annie had seen enough. The hand on the shoulder, the posture, the white chalk tucked behind the ear. Samuel Carter had stood in a Whitmore workroom, beside a garment Richard now used in a film about his own legacy. Rewind it, Annie said. The coordinator shook his head. I can't. It's running live. Tasha spoke fast. My stream caught the monitor. Maybe not clean, but it caught it. Richard turned slowly toward them. Caught what? Annie faced him. My father was in your film. So? Many people worked for this house over the years. You said you only knew of him. Richard's jaw tightened. Eleanor took one step forward. That jacket in the footage. The white one. That was from the disputed collection. Richard looked at her. You're reaching. No, she said. I'm remembering. Annie felt something inside her lock into place. For years, her father's story had been smoke. Rumors. Old pain. A name people lowered their voices around. Now there was an image. A frame. Proof that Samuel had been closer to Richard's so-called masterpiece than Richard ever admitted. The finale film ended in the hall, and applause rose on cue. But backstage, no one moved to join it. Claire Whitmore appeared at the edge of the curtain, her headset hanging around her neck, face pale. She had been in front coordinating donor seating. But she had clearly seen enough from the side monitor to understand something was wrong. Dad, she said carefully. Why was Samuel Carter in that footage? Richard's eyes snapped to her. Not now. When then? The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a daughter hearing a crack in the family story for the first time. Richard stepped close to Claire and lowered his voice. Go back to the front. Claire did not move. Her gaze shifted to Annie, then to the coat still on Marissa's shoulders, then to Eleanor. Miss Briggs, Claire said, did my father work with Samuel Carter? Eleanor looked at Richard before answering. Yes, Claire swallowed. On the collection he was accused of stealing from? Richard said. Claire, Eleanor said. Yes. The words seemed to open the floor under them all. Richard pointed toward the exit. Everyone who is not essential leaves now. Nobody moved. Not because they were brave all at once. People rarely become brave that cleanly. They stayed because too many phones were recording. Because too many questions had been asked. Because Annie had cut one seam and revealed a larger one beneath it. Tasha looked into her phone and spoke to the stream. For everyone watching, Richard Whitmore's own finale film just showed Samuel Carter, in an archival workroom image connected to the disputed collection. "We are asking Mr. Whitmore for comment." Richard lunged half a step toward her. "You do not know what you're talking about." Annie stood between them before she realized she had moved. "She knows what she saw," Annie said. "So do I." Richard looked down at her as if she had become something he could no longer easily name. "You are making a very serious mistake." Annie thought of her father bent over cheap hems in Brooklyn, of the newspaper clipping hidden away, of all the years he had let people call him what they wanted because fighting cost more than he had. "No," she said. "I think I just found the first stitch." Richard did not answer Annie. He looked past her, toward the stage manager, toward security, toward anyone who still understood that his name paid the invoices in that building. For a second, the old order tried to reassemble itself. Assistants lowered their eyes. A dresser stepped back. The production coordinator touched his headset and waited for a command he could obey. Then Claire spoke again. "Dad, where is the archive room key?" Richard turned to her slowly. "This is not your concern. It has our name on the door." "That makes it my concern." "No," he said. "It makes it my company." Claire flinched, but she did not step back. Annie saw the effort it cost her. Claire Whitmore had grown up inside rooms where people opened doors before she reached them. Defying Richard was not natural to her. It looked like learning to walk on a moving floor. Eleanor leaned on her cane. "The old workroom files were never destroyed. I saw them boxed after the rebrand." Richard's eyes cut toward her. "You saw many things incorrectly." "Maybe," Eleanor said, "but I remember paper. Men lie more easily than paper does." Tasha shifted her phone between Richard and Claire. "Miss Whitmore, are you saying there may be records connected to Samuel Carter in the company archive?" Claire looked at the phone, then at her father. "I'm saying I want to know why he was in that film." Richard stepped closer to his daughter and lowered his voice, but the microphone clipped to his lapel still caught enough. "You are embarrassing yourself." Claire's jaw tightened. "No. I think I'm starting to understand who taught me that." The words hit harder because they were quiet. For the first time that night, Annie saw pain cross Richard's face before anger covered it. Not guilt. Not yet. Something more private. The shock of losing control over someone he assumed belonged to him. He reached for Claire's arm. She pulled away. "Don't," she said. No one moved. Even the runway applause beyond the curtain had faded into the next segment of music, leaving backstage with only the hum of lights and the soft, mechanical breath of garment steamers. Claire looked at the production coordinator. "Marcus, archive key." Marcus swallowed. "I don't have authorization. I'm creative coordinator. Mr. Whitmore has to approve archive access during an active show." Claire held out her hand. "Marcus." He looked at Richard, then at the phones, then at Annie standing beside the altered coat. His face showed the calculation of an ordinary man who had spent years surviving powerful people. Finally, he reached into the pocket of his black utility vest and placed a brass keyring in Claire's palm. Richard's voice went flat. "You're fired." Marcus gave a small, tired laugh. "Probably." Claire turned and walked toward the service corridor. Annie followed before anyone could stop her. "Where do you think you're going?" Richard said. "To find out what happened to my father." "You have no right to company property." Annie looked back. "You put my father in your company film." Marissa stepped in beside Annie, still wearing the coat. "I'm coming too." Richard pointed at the coat. "That stays here." Marissa touched the lapel. "Then I stay with it." Eleanor moved after them at a slower pace. "I advise everyone to keep cameras on." Tasha did not need to be told. She walked backward for 3 steps, filming Richard's face, then turned and followed the women into the corridor. The backstage hallway was narrow, painted a dull gray that did not match the clean white world of the runway. Pipes ran overhead. Extension cords were taped along the floor. The farther they moved from the lights, the less glamorous Whitmore House became. Annie noticed that. She had spent enough time behind beautiful things to know how often beauty depended on hidden mess. Claire walked fast, keyring tight in her fist. "Do you know where the files are?" Tasha asked. "I know where the old boxes are," Claire said. "Whether they still hold anything useful, I don't know." Eleanor breathed carefully beside them. "Look for collection books from 2001 or 2002, early Whitmore House, before the formal launch. Samuel's work would have been under development files, not press materials. Annie glanced at her. You remember the year? I remember the scandal. Eleanor's mouth pulled tight. And I remember what I didn't do. They reached an elevator used by staff and freight. Claire jabbed the button. No one spoke while the doors took their time opening. Annie could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She thought of Samuel at Carter Alterations, probably closing up for the night, checking the lock twice, counting the cash drawer, maybe wondering why she had not texted. She wanted to call him. She also feared saying his name before she had something solid enough to hold. The elevator doors opened. Richard stepped in behind them just before they closed. Nobody expected it. Even Claire turned. He stood near the panel, suit still perfect, face controlled. If you insist on making a spectacle, he said, I'll make sure you don't misrepresent what you find. You mean you'll make sure we don't find it, Marissa said. Richard ignored her. The elevator descended. The numbers changed slowly. With every floor, the sound of the show faded. Annie stared at Richard's reflection in the metal doors. He looked older there, not by much, but enough. The polish was weaker under freight elevator light. You knew my father, she said. Richard's reflection did not move. Many people passed through workrooms. That wasn't my question. You're 18, he said. You think every silence hides a crime. No, I think some silences are built by people who can afford them. Eleanor looked at Annie then, and something like approval passed over her face. The doors opened to the basement. The archive corridor smelled of cardboard, dust, and old fabric. Fluorescent lights flickered above rows of storage cages and metal shelves. Claire unlocked a chain-link door marked WH Archive, authorized staff only. Inside, boxes were stacked by year, some labeled in neat printed stickers, others in faded marker. Claire paused. Richard stood behind her. This is absurd. Then it should be easy to prove, she said. They began searching. Tasha filmed the labels. Eleanor directed them with surprising precision. Not runway photos. Not press. Development. Pattern. Workroom notes. Marissa held the coat closed and used one hand to shift lighter boxes. Annie moved faster, scanning every label. FW1. Private clients. Press pulls. Donor event. Early structures. End client. End of. Foundation looks. Then she saw it. A long flat box on the second shelf, pushed behind two newer ones. The marker had faded, but the words were still readable. Carter, white jacket, dispute file. Annie's hand stopped on the cardboard. No one spoke. Claire saw the label and covered her mouth. Richard moved forward. That box is privileged company material. Tasha angled the camera toward it. Say that again, Mr. Whitmore. He stopped. Annie pulled the box down. It was heavier than she expected. Dust slid across her fingers. For a moment, she could not open it. Her hands, the hands Richard had mocked, would not obey. Marissa stepped closer. Want me to? Annie shook her head. No. She lifted the lid. Inside were tissue paper, old Polaroids, pattern pieces, yellowed notes, and a sketch mounted on board. The sketch showed a white jacket with a turned shoulder and an angled waistline. At the bottom, in dark pencil, was a signature Annie had seen on birthday cards, rent checks, and notes tucked into lunch bags. Samuel Carter. Her breath left her. Eleanor leaned in and whispered, Dear God. Claire reached for a memo clipped to the inside folder. Her eyes moved across it, then froze. What does it say? Annie asked. Claire did not answer. Tasha lowered the phone just enough to read, then raised it again, voice careful. It says, If Carter continues to challenge authorship, remove him from the workroom before press review. RW wants the matter buried before launch. Richard's voice cut through the room. That memo lacks context. Annie looked up at him. For years, she had imagined proof would feel like relief. It did not. It felt like a wound opening cleanly after being infected too long. Context? She said. Richard adjusted his cuffs, though they needed no adjusting. Your father was difficult. Talented, perhaps, but difficult. He did not understand how houses function. Ideas are collaborative. Eleanor's voice was sharp. Collaboration does not require erasing a man's name. Richard looked at her. You were not in charge. No, she said, and that is my shame. Annie lifted one of the Polaroids. Her father was younger in the picture, standing beside the same white jacket from the finale film. His hand rested on the shoulder seam. He looked tired, focused, alive in a way she had only seen in rare moments at the shop. There was writing on the back. Carter revision approved. Richard to present. Annie read it twice. Claire's face had gone pale. Dad. Richard did not look at her. Annie placed the Polaroid on top of the sketch and turned both toward Tasha's camera. My father didn't steal from you, she said, her voice lower than she expected. You stole him. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. Above them, somewhere far away, the fashion show continued. Music played. Guests clapped on cue. Models walked in garments, carrying a name that had just begun to crack. In the basement, under fluorescent lights, Annie Carter stood over a box of old paper and understood that the first stitch had not been the coat. It was the name, Samuel Carter, and tonight, she was going to pull until the whole seam came undone. Richard reached for the Polaroid. Annie pulled it back before his fingers touched it. For a second, they stood like that in the basement archive, the billionaire in his perfect suit, and the 18-year-old temp worker with dust on her sleeves, both holding different sides of a past he thought belonged to him. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere above them, music from the runway show thudded faintly through the ceiling, as if another world was still pretending nothing had happened. That is company property, Richard said. Annie held the photograph against her chest. It has my father's name on it. It was produced inside this house. So was the lie. Claire looked at her father. Dad, stop. Richard turned on her. You have no idea what you're doing. I know what I'm reading. Claire held up the memo with shaking fingers. This says Carter challenged authorship. This says someone wanted him removed before press review. This says RW. Richard's jaw worked once. Initials are not proof. Tasha stepped closer. Phone steady. Then say that on camera. He looked at the lens, then away. That was answer enough for half the people watching. Eleanor reached into the box and lifted a folded pattern piece. The paper was old, but carefully preserved, the edges softened by time. Red pencil marks ran along the shoulder curve. At the top, in neat block letters, someone had written, S, Carter revision, left shoulder turn. Eleanor exhaled slowly. This is his draft. Annie looked at the lines. She did not understand every technical mark, not fully, but she knew her father's rhythm. She saw it in the curve that refused to force the fabric, in the adjustment that gave the garment room to move. It was the same logic he had taught her in Brooklyn, the same logic she had used upstairs on the black coat. For years, people had called him a thief. Now the paper itself seemed to lean toward him and say, no, he was here first. Richard's voice hardened. Development files contain multiple hands. That is how fashion works. Eleanor looked up. Then why was his name removed from the final credits? Richard did not answer. Claire turned another page. There's a press draft. She scanned it quickly. The jacket is credited to Richard Whitmore, lead designer. No mention of Samuel. That was standard, Richard said. For you, Eleanor said. He pointed at her. You are rewriting history because you regret being irrelevant. Eleanor's face did not change, but Annie saw the insult land. The older woman's hand tightened around her cane. No, Eleanor said. I am remembering history because I am tired of men like you surviving on other people's silence. Tasha's livestream comments were moving too fast to read, but her eyes flicked to the screen long enough for Annie to see the numbers rising. Thousands now. Maybe more. The basement was no longer private. The dust, the memo, the old photograph, Richard's face, Claire's shaking hands, all of it had left the building through a small phone held by a woman Richard could not control. Marissa, still in Annie's altered coat, reached into the box and pulled out another photograph. Annie. Annie turned. The picture showed Samuel Carter standing beside 3 people in a workroom. Richard was there too, younger, no gray at his temples, smiling with one hand in his pocket. Samuel was not smiling. He stood beside a dress form wearing the white jacket, one sleeve unfinished, chalk lines still visible. On the table in front of him, were the same pattern pieces Eleanor now held. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, someone had written, "Samuel's shoulder solution saved the look. Richard presenting Monday." Claire read it and sat down on a storage crate as if her legs had given out. "My God," she whispered. Richard looked at his daughter, and for the first time, Annie saw fear that had nothing to do with business. "Claire," she shook her head. "No. Don't say my name like that. Not right now. You don't understand what was at stake." "What was at stake?" Claire stood again, anger breaking through the shock. "Your reputation? Your launch? Your chance to be called a genius?" Richard's mouth tightened. This house employed hundreds of people. Investors were ready to walk. One unstable tailor threatened everything because he didn't understand how credit works. Annie felt the words move through her like cold water. "Unstable?" she said. Richard glanced at her, then looked away. "My father lost every job because of what you said. He lost work because he made accusations he couldn't support. Because you buried the proof." Richard's eyes flashed. "Because no one cared enough to dig." The sentence left his mouth before he could dress it properly. The basement went still. Tasha did not speak. Eleanor did not speak. Even the faint music overhead seemed to fall back. Annie stared at him. She had expected denial. She had expected more polished words. She had not expected the truth to come out wearing contempt. Claire whispered, "Dad." Richard realized what he had said. His face closed again, but too late. Tasha's voice was quiet. "Mr. Whitmore, did you just say no one cared enough to dig into Samuel Carter's claim?" "I said nothing of the kind. It's live." He took one step toward her. Marissa moved between them before Annie could. The black coat shifted on her shoulders, the silver lining catching the basement light. "Don't," Marissa said. Richard stared at her. "You're done after tonight." "Maybe," she said, "but at least I'll know what I'm done for." Annie looked down at the Polaroid in her hand. Her father was younger than she had ever really imagined him. Younger than he seemed in her memories. Standing in a room where he still believed skill might be enough. She wondered what he had felt when the door shut, whether he had been angry, whether he had begged someone to look again, whether he had waited for Eleanor, or someone like Eleanor, to speak. Eleanor seemed to hear the thought. "I saw him after," she said softly. Annie looked up. In the hallway outside the old workroom, he had his pattern folder under one arm. He kept saying, "Check the dates. Just check the dates." Eleanor swallowed. "I was an assistant technical director then, not powerless, but afraid enough to act like I was. I told myself someone else would handle it." Annie's voice was barely above a whisper. "No one did." "No," Eleanor said. "No one did." That apology was not enough. Eleanor knew it. Annie knew it. But it was the first honest thing anyone from that world had given Samuel Carter in over 20 years. Claire began gathering documents with quick, careful movements. "We need copies," Richard snapped. "You will not remove those files." Claire looked at him. "Watch me. You work for this house. Then maybe this house should have taught me not to steal." His face went hard. "You are my daughter." She held the memo up between them. "And that is the problem I'll have to live with." Annie almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Claire had not created the lie, but she had lived warm inside the building it helped pay for. Now the walls were talking back. Tasha said, "I can photograph everything now. Time, stamped, live." "Do it?" Claire said. Eleanor nodded. "Start with the sketch, the memo, the Polaroids, and the pattern annotations. Make sure Samuel's signature is clear." Tasha moved in, filming each item. Annie placed the Polaroid flat on the box lid, then the sketch, then the memo. Her hands had stopped shaking again, not because she was calm, but because something steadier than calm had taken over. Richard watched them document his past piece by piece. Above them, the elevator dinged. Everyone turned. Marcus, the production coordinator, stepped out, breathing hard. "You need to come back upstairs." Richard seized on it. "Finally. Tell them the show is collapsing because of this circus." Marcus ignored him and looked at Tasha. "Your stream hit 200,000. Tasha blinked. "What?" 200,000 live. "More clips are already being reposted." He swallowed. "And people upstairs are asking why Samuel Carter's name is trending." Annie felt the floor tilt. Her father's name, the one whispered in shame, the one customers used carefully, the one Samuel carried like a bruise, was moving through the world faster than Richard could bury it. Marcus looked at Annie. There are reporters at the side entrance. Real ones, not just fashion press. Richard said. Nobody speaks to them. Claire closed the file box. I will. No, Richard said. Yes. Claire lifted the box with both hands. And Annie should too. Annie stepped back. I need to call my father first. Everyone stopped. The simple sentence brought the room back from scandal to a man in Brooklyn who did not yet know that strangers were saying his name again. Annie pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over Samuel's contact. For a second, she was terrified. Not of Richard, not of cameras. Of hurting her father with hope. Eleanor touched her arm gently. Tell him you found paper. Annie looked at her. He asked us to check the dates, Eleanor said. Tell him someone finally did. Annie pressed call. It rang 3 times. Then Samuel Carter answered, his voice tired and familiar, with the shop bell faintly jingling behind him. Annie, you all right? She closed her eyes. No, Dad, she said, but I found your name. For a moment, Samuel said nothing. Annie could hear the shop around him, the soft buzz of the old fluorescent light, the little bell above the door still moving from someone's exit, a radio playing low behind the counter, maybe the Friday night jazz station he liked when he worked late. Those ordinary sounds almost broke her. What do you mean you found my name? Samuel asked. Annie looked at the box on the archive table. The sketch, the memo, the Polaroids, the pattern pieces, her father's life reduced to paper, hidden under dust while another man built a kingdom upstairs. I found your sketch, she said. And your pattern notes. There's a memo, Dad. They knew you challenged the credit. They knew before the press review. The line went quiet again. Annie, Samuel said, and now his voice had changed. Where are you? In the Whitmore archive. What? I'm with Miss Briggs. Eleanor Briggs. She remembers you. Annie heard him breathe in. Not sharply, not loud. But the way people breathe when an old wound has been touched without warning. Eleanor, he said. She says you told them to check the dates. Samuel gave a small sound that was almost a laugh and almost pain. I said it until my throat hurt. Annie pressed the phone tighter to her ear. They didn't listen. No, he said. They didn't. Tasha kept filming, but she lowered the phone enough to give Annie the small mercy of not pushing the camera into her face. Claire stood with the file box in her arms, staring at the floor. Marissa stayed near the elevator, one hand on the altered coat as if someone might still try to strip it from her. Richard stood apart from them, silent now, but not defeated. Annie could feel him thinking, calculating, waiting for the cleanest way to turn the room back in his favor. Dad, Annie said, Richard is here. Samuel did not answer right away. Then his voice came lower. Don't stand alone with that man. I'm not alone. Good. The word carried more fear than relief. Richard stepped forward. Mr. Carter, he said, loud enough for the phone to catch. This is a serious misunderstanding being fueled by emotional people who don't understand how archival material works. Annie turned the phone slightly but did not hand it over. Samuel's voice became very still. Richard, the name crossed the years between them. Richard's face tightened. It's been a long time. Not for me. No one in the archive moved. Samuel continued. You still wearing other men's work like a suit? Richard's jaw flexed. Careful. Samuel gave a dry, tired laugh. You said that to me in 2002. Eleanor closed her eyes. Annie looked from one face to another. What happened that day? Samuel was silent long enough that she thought he might refuse. He had refused for years. Not because he did not trust her, but because some memories cost too much to pull out in front of a child. But Annie was not a child in his voice anymore. Maybe he heard that too. I finished the shoulder revision on the white jacket, Samuel said. The one they said I stole. Richard couldn't get it to sit right. Nobody could. The front buckled every time the model moved. I opened the left shoulder, turned the panel, dropped the excess into the waist. Same thing. You probably did tonight. If I know you. Annie looked at the black coat on Marissa's shoulders. Yes, she whispered. I logged the change. Signed the pattern sheet. Eleanor saw it. A few others did too. 2 days later, my name was gone from the workroom board. The jacket was credited to Richard for press. I asked why. They told me I was lucky to be in the room at all. Richard cut in. That is not an accurate description. Samuel ignored him. I pushed. I was angry. I shouldn't have shouted, but I did. Then a sketch appeared. My sketch. They said it had come from Richard's private file and that I had copied it. I asked them to check the dates. They wouldn't. I asked for the pattern logs. They said they were missing. Claire looked down at the box in her arms. They weren't missing, she said softly. Samuel heard her. Who is that? Claire swallowed. Claire Whitmore. Another silence. Samuel said, You were little. I'm sorry, Claire said. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Samuel replied. But it's more than your father ever offered. Richard's voice hardened. Claire. Enough. She looked at him. No. I don't think I've said enough in my whole life. The elevator doors opened again before Richard could answer. 2 security guards stepped out, followed by a woman in a black blazer with a legal badge clipped to her pocket. She had the controlled expression of someone trained to enter rooms after damage had already been done. Mr. Whitmore, she said, we need to return upstairs. Now. Richard looked relieved for less than a second. Finally, the woman glanced at Tasha's phone, then at the box. And no one should make further statements without counsel, Tasha said. Are you counsel? I represent Whitmore House. Then you represent the company whose archive contains evidence being discussed on a live stream with over 200,000 viewers. The lawyer's face changed just enough. Claire adjusted her grip on the box. I'm taking these upstairs. No, the lawyer said quickly. Those documents remain in archive custody. They've been in archive custody for 22 years, Claire said. That seems to have worked out well for everyone except Samuel Carter. Annie heard her father breathe through the phone. Annie, Samuel said, I'm here. Don't let them take the originals without copies. I won't. And don't sign anything. I won't. There it was again. The father inside the wounded man, still trying to protect his daughter from a room he had never been able to defeat. The lawyer turned to Richard. Sir, reporters are at the west entrance. The board chair has called twice. The mayor's cultural office is asking whether the gala will continue. Richard looked at Annie with open hatred now, though he still kept his voice low. Do you understand what you have done? Annie looked at the sketch with Samuel's signature. Started late. Eleanor's mouth softened, almost a smile. The lawyer stepped toward Tasha. You need to stop filming. No, Tasha said. This is private property. This is public interest. That is not how law works. No, Tasha said, but it's how accountability starts. Marissa moved beside Tasha. Touch her phone and I walk upstairs and say everything on the main runway. You're under contract, the lawyer said. Marissa nodded. Then add it to the pile. Marcus appeared behind the guards, looking more tired than frightened now. They're chanting upstairs. Richard turned. Who? The audience. Marcus swallowed. Some people saw the stream. It's spreading through the room. They're saying, pay her. Then someone started saying Samuel Carter's name. Annie's fingers went numb around the phone. Through the speaker, Samuel said nothing. Maybe he had heard it. Maybe the idea of a room full of strangers saying his name was too strange to trust. Claire looked at Annie. We should go up. Annie shook her head once. Not yet. Why? Annie lifted the phone. Because if they're saying his name, he should hear it. She turned the volume up and held the phone toward the elevator as they stepped inside together. Annie. Claire with the box. Eleanor with her cane. Tasha filming. Marissa still wearing the coat. Marcus, the 2 guards who no longer seemed sure whom they were guarding, Richard, and the lawyer trying to keep up with a crisis that had already escaped legal language. The elevator rose. At first there was only the hum of machinery. Then faintly, through the walls, sound began to form. Applause. Voices. Not organized at first. Then clearer, as they neared the main floor. Pay her. Pay her. Then another sound threaded through it. Samuel Carter. Samuel Carter. Annie held the phone with both hands. Dad, she whispered, do you hear that? On the other end, Samuel Carter made one small sound. Not a sob. Not quite. more like a man setting down something he had carried so long he had forgotten its weight. "I hear it," he said. The elevator doors opened to the side corridor of the glass atrium, and the sound rushed in full. Richard stepped out first because habit still told him rooms opened for him. But this time, when the people turned, they did not look at him the way they had before. They looked at Annie. They looked at the coat. They looked at the box in Claire's arms. And somewhere through a phone speaker in his daughter's hand, Samuel Carter listened as the room that once erased him began, at last, to say his name. The side corridor opened into a storm of voices. Annie had expected cameras. She had expected questions. She had not expected the sound to feel physical, like heat from an open oven. People who had been seated in neat rows now stood in clusters along the aisle. Some held phones high. Some looked confused, trying to piece together what they had missed from the live stream. Others already knew enough to be angry. "Pay her. Say his name." "Samuel Carter?" Richard stopped near the entrance to the runway hall, and for the first time that night, the room did not quiet itself for him. That seemed to disturb him more than the shouting. Annie watched him wait for silence that did not come. Claire stood beside Annie, with the archive box held against her chest. The cardboard looked too plain for the damage it carried. A billionaire's empire, Annie thought, could sit on top of one box in a basement and still pretend it was marble. Tasha stepped into the open, phone raised. "Mr. Whitmore, will you honor the offer you made to Annie Carter on camera?" The question cut through the voices. People repeated it. "Will you pay her?" Richard turned toward Tasha with a smile that belonged at charity dinners, not in a room that had just heard evidence of theft. "As I said earlier," he began, "this situation has become emotionally charged. Whitmore House will review the circumstances carefully and respond through the proper channels." A man in the front row shouted, "That means no." A few people laughed, but it was not kind laughter now. Annie kept the phone pressed to her ear. Samuel had gone quiet again. She could hear him breathing. She wondered where he was standing in the shop. Behind the counter, maybe. One hand on the old register. Or near the front window, looking out at Brooklyn as if the whole city had shifted while he was hemming someone else's pants. "Dad," she whispered. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," Samuel said. His voice was rough. Richard heard her and looked toward the phone. His eyes narrowed, as if Samuel being present even by speaker made the room more dangerous. The lawyer in the black blazer moved to Richard's side. "No further statements," she said under her breath. But Richard had spent too many years being obeyed to understand when silence would serve him better. He lifted both hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand the desire for a dramatic ending. But fashion is not decided by internet chance. It is decided by standards." Eleanor Briggs stepped forward before Annie could. "Then let us discuss standards." The room settled enough to hear her. Even people who did not know Eleanor understood age and authority when they saw it. She stood with her cane planted in front of her, shoulders straight, voice clear. "I have spent more than 40 years in workrooms, fitting rooms, and technical departments. I have watched young designers learn. I have watched famous designers take more credit than they earned. Tonight, I watched Annie Carter correct a failed garment in 15 seconds using a technique I first saw from her father, Samuel Carter, over 20 years ago." Richard said, "Eleanor, I'm not finished." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The documents in that box appear to show Samuel's signature, his pattern notes, and an internal memo regarding his challenge to authorship. Those documents should be examined by independent counsel, not buried again in a company archive. Applause broke out. It did not last long, but it made Richard's face harden. Claire took a breath and stepped forward. "I found the box." A hush moved through the hall. It was one thing for Annie, Eleanor, or Tasha to speak. It was another for Richard's own daughter to stand under the house lights with the evidence in her arms. Claire looked smaller than she had backstage, but her voice held. The archive label names Samuel Carter and the disputed white jacket. The files include notes that should have been reviewed years ago. They weren't. I don't know everything yet, but I know enough to say this publicly. Those records should not go back into Whitmore House custody tonight. The lawyer touched Claire's elbow. "Claire, stop." Claire pulled away. "No." Richard stared at his daughter. "You are making a mistake you cannot undo." Claire looked at him with wet eyes, but she did not fold. I think you already made it. That sentence changed the room more than the chant had. A daughter had not accused him fully. Not yet. But she had stopped defending him. For powerful men, losing the room was bad. Losing the person who had inherited the room was worse. Tasha turned the camera toward Annie. Annie, do you want to say anything? Annie did not want to. Her throat felt tight. Her hands were cold. She was still wearing the same chalk-dusted shirt, still holding the same phone, still 18 years old in a hall full of adults who could buy and sell the future of people like her. But Samuel was listening, and for once, the silence would not protect him. She stepped forward. My father worked in rooms like this before I was born, she said. He taught me to sew in a shop in Brooklyn. Not because he failed, but because this industry shut every door after calling him a thief. She looked down at the phone. He told them to check the dates. Nobody did. Tonight, we found dates. We found his name. We found what they hid. The room went quiet enough for Annie to hear a camera shutter. She looked at Richard. You said if I made something better, you would pay. But the money is not the whole thing. You said my father was just a tailor. You said needles and thread weren't art. But everything upstairs tonight stood on people like him. People who cut, pinned, pressed, fixed, stayed late, and watched someone else walk out to applause. Someone in the back said, "That's right." Annie continued before courage left her. So yes, Mr. Whitmore, you owe me the money, but you owe my father his name. The sentence landed, and this time the crowd did not immediately shout. They absorbed it first. Older faces changed, some with anger, some with shame, some with the look of people remembering someone they had once failed to defend. Then the chant returned, slower and heavier. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Richard looked toward the exits. Security did not move. The lawyer spoke quickly into her phone. Marcus stood near the curtain with his headset dangling around his neck, no longer pretending the show was under control. Richard turned to Annie. You want a performance? Fine. He pulled out his phone. His thumb moved across the screen. For a moment, Annie thought he was calling someone. Then he held the screen toward her. $100,000, he said. Transfer pending. Tasha stepped closer. We need to see confirmation. Richard glared at her. Claire said, show it. He looked at his daughter, and something in his face broke smaller, meaner. He turned the phone so the camera could catch the confirmation screen. Transfer sent. The audience reacted, but Annie barely heard them. The number was impossible. It meant rent, medicine, breathing room. It meant her father would not have to choose between ordering new thread and paying the electric bill. It meant something, but not everything. Richard put the phone away. There, paid. Annie did not move. And the apology? Tasha asked. The lawyer whispered, do not. Richard's jaw tightened. Eleanor said, you promised. For several seconds, he stood there, trapped by cameras, by his daughter, by an old box of paper, by a young woman he had called a scrap girl in front of everyone. Finally, he said, I apologize to Annie Carter for the manner in which I addressed her tonight. Boos rose immediately. That's not it, Marissa said from beside Annie. Richard's eyes flashed. Annie lifted the phone slightly. Say my father's name. He looked at her as if she had asked him to kneel. The crowd quieted again. Richard swallowed. It was small, but visible. I acknowledge, he said, each word forced, that questions have been raised regarding Samuel Carter's work and his history with Whitmore House. Those questions will be reviewed. Eleanor's voice cut in. Say he was here. Richard stared at her. Say he worked here, Eleanor said. Say he contributed to the white jacket. Richard's face had gone pale under the lights. He worked here, Richard said. He contributed to the white jacket. The phone in Annie's hand made a sound she had never heard from her father before. She looked down. Dad? Samuel did not speak at first. When he did, his voice was barely steady. I heard him. Annie closed her eyes for 1 second. Not long. She could not afford to disappear inside feeling yet. Claire stepped closer and held out the archive box. Annie, this should go to an independent attorney tonight. I know someone who handles intellectual property disputes, not company counsel. Outside, Richard snapped. Claire, if you do this, she turned to him. What? You'll cut me off? Fire me? Stop calling me your daughter in public? He said nothing. She nodded once, as if that silence answered every childhood question she had never asked. Tasha lowered her voice. There are reporters outside. They're asking for all three of you. Annie, Samuel, and Claire. Samuel isn't here, Annie said. Samuel heard that. I can be. No, Dad. You don't have to come tonight. Yes, he said. I do. Annie's chest tightened. It's a lot. I've had 22 years of quiet, Samuel said. I can handle a little noise. Eleanor smiled then. Not wide, not easy, but real. Richard turned away as if the sight offended him. This is over. Annie looked at the altered black coat on Marissa's shoulders, at the box in Claire's hands, at Tasha's phone, at the crowd still watching him with new eyes. No, Annie said. This is the first time it isn't. The west entrance of the glass atrium had never been designed for truth. It was designed for donors, town cars, and photographers who knew which side of a face sold better in magazines. That night, it held too many people and not enough air. By the time Annie reached the corridor, reporters had formed a half circle near the glass doors. Some were fashion press, still wearing event badges and polite shoes. Others had come from local newsrooms after seeing Tasha's stream explode across their feeds. A few guests lingered behind them, pretending not to listen while holding their phones chest high. Claire stayed beside Annie with the archive box in both arms. Eleanor walked on Annie's other side, slower but steady. Marissa still wore the black coat. Tasha moved backward, filming as she went. Richard followed several steps behind with his lawyer, no longer leading the room but refusing to be seen as chased by it. A reporter called out first. Annie, is it true Richard Whitmore paid you $100,000 on camera? Another voice cut in. Miss Whitmore, are those company files connected to Samuel Carter? Mr. Whitmore, did Whitmore House knowingly erase a black designer's contribution? That last question froze the corridor. It was no longer just a fashion story. Everyone felt it. Richard stepped forward before Annie could speak. Whitmore House has always supported diversity, craftsmanship, and the creative contributions of many hands. What happened tonight is being exaggerated in real time by people who do not understand the history of this company. Tasha kept filming. Then explain the memo. Richard's lawyer touched his sleeve. Richard, he ignored her. A memo without context is not a verdict. Eleanor's cane tapped once against the floor. Context is what powerful men ask for when evidence finally develops a voice. Several cameras turned toward her. Annie felt the phone still warm in her hand. Samuel had stayed on the line, quiet now, listening. She had begged him not to come too fast, but he was already on his way. He had told her he was closing the shop, taking the train, and not to argue with her father in front of strangers because she had done enough arguing for one night. She had almost laughed when he said it. Almost. A woman from a local news station raised her recorder. Annie, what do you want to happen now? The question was simple. Too simple. Annie looked at the box in Claire's arms, then at the coat on Marissa, then toward the glass doors where camera lights reflected against the night. I want the documents preserved, Annie said. I want someone outside Whitmore House to review them, and I want my father's name cleared if those files prove what we think they prove. If, Richard said. Annie turned toward him. Yes, if. That's what fairness sounds like. You should try it. A few people murmured. Tasha's mouth twitched, but she kept the phone steady. Claire spoke next. I'm arranging for the documents to be delivered tonight to an independent intellectual property attorney. Copies have already been recorded on live stream. The originals will not return to private archive storage without a witness. The lawyer stepped in. Miss Whitmore is not authorized to transfer company property. Claire looked at her. Then file an injunction and explain why you're trying to lock away evidence tied to a 22-year-old authorship dispute. The lawyer stopped. Richard stared at Claire as if he no longer recognized the woman he had raised. You think this makes you noble? No, Claire said. I think it makes me late. That answer landed harder than anger would have. Annie glanced at her. And for a second, the two young women stood on opposite sides of the same damage. Annie had inherited the wound. Claire had inherited the building that hid it. Neither had chosen the beginning, but both were now responsible for what happened next. The glass doors opened behind the reporters. Cold night air slipped into the corridor. Samuel Carter walked in wearing his dark work coat over a blue shirt, the collar slightly bent from the rush. He had not changed into a suit. He had not shaved. A measuring tape still hung from one pocket because he must have forgotten it was there. His hands were clean but dry at the knuckles, hands that had spent the evening inside a small Brooklyn shop while the world began dragging his name back into public. Annie saw him and forgot the reporters. "Dad." Samuel looked past the cameras until he found her face. His eyes moved over her quickly, checking for hurt the way fathers do before they ask questions. Then he saw Marissa in the coat. His gaze stopped at the shoulder. For a moment, his expression opened. "You did that?" he asked. Annie nodded. Samuel walked closer. He did not touch the coat yet. He looked first, respectful as always. Then he lifted one finger and traced the air near the turned shoulder without making contact. "You opened the line," he said. "It was fighting her, and you let the weight fall to the waist." Annie swallowed. "Like you taught me." Samuel's eyes shone, but he held himself together. "Good." One word. It was enough. It almost undid her. A reporter spoke softly, sensing the shift. "Mr. Carter, did you design the white jacket at issue in the old Whitmore collection?" Samuel turned toward the cameras. He looked smaller than Richard in height, poorer by every visible measure, but there was something in the way he stood that made the corridor settle. "I worked on it," he said. "I corrected the shoulder and the balance. I signed my pattern sheet. I asked for my contribution to be recorded. When the garment was presented, my name was gone." Richard's face tightened. "That is an oversimplification." Samuel looked at him for the first time. 22 years crossed between them without courtesy. "You told me no one would believe a tailor over a Whitmore," Samuel said. Richard's lawyer said, "Mr. Carter, I would caution you." "No," Samuel said, not loudly. "I've been cautioned long enough." The corridor went still. Samuel continued, "I don't need to shout tonight. I don't need revenge. I want the dates checked. I wanted that then. I want it now." Eleanor stepped beside him. "And I will testify that I saw Samuel's revision before the press presentation." Samuel looked at her. There was hurt in his face, old and not fully healed. Eleanor met it without defense. "I should have said it then." "Yes," Samuel said. "I'm saying it now." He nodded once. He did not forgive her on camera for people's comfort. Annie respected him for that. Claire came forward with the archive box. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry." Samuel studied her. "For what you did?" "No," Claire said. "For what I benefited from without asking enough questions." Samuel took that in. "That's a different kind of apology." "I know." He looked at the box. "May I?" Claire set it on a narrow table near the wall and opened the lid. Cameras leaned in, but Tasha said, "Give him space." And somehow people listened. Samuel lifted the Polaroid of his younger self beside the white jacket. His thumb rested on the edge, not over the image. Annie stood close enough to see his hand tremble. "I forgot that shirt," he said quietly. Annie let out a small breath she had not meant to release. Of all the things in the picture, that was what he saw first. Not the theft, not Richard. The shirt he had worn when he still believed tomorrow might be fair. Samuel turned the photo over and read the back. Carter revision approved. Richard to present. His jaw tightened. He placed the photo down carefully, as if anger might damage the proof. The local reporter asked, "Mr. Carter, what did this accusation cost you?" Samuel looked toward the glass doors, beyond them to the black cars and city lights. "Work, friends, sleep. My wife had to listen to people ask whether I had really done it. My daughter grew up learning that her last name made certain rooms go quiet." He looked at Annie. "That may be the part I hate most." Annie could not speak. Richard shifted. "This is theater." Samuel turned to him. "No, Richard. Theater was you putting my work in your legacy film." That line moved through the corridor like a match touched to paper. Reporters started talking over one another. "Mr. Whitmore?" Response? "Did you know Carter's name was in the archive? Will Whitmore House issue a formal correction?" Richard raised his hands. "There will be a full internal review," Claire said. "Independent review." He looked at her. "Claire." She did not flinch. "Independent." The lawyer closed her eyes for half a second, then said the words Richard would not. Whitmore House will cooperate with an independent review of the Carter materials. Tasha repeated it for the stream. You all heard that. Samuel looked tired suddenly. Not weak. Just human. The noise. The lights. The sudden return of a past he had sealed away to survive. All of it pressed on him. Annie slipped her hand into his. You okay? She asked. No, he said. Then he squeezed her hand. But I'm standing. Outside, more people were gathering at the glass, phones raised. Inside, the fashion show had ended, but nobody was talking about the collection anymore. Richard Whitmore's name was still on the building, on the banners, on the invitations. But for the first time that night, it was not the only name the room knew. A reporter near the door said, Mr. Carter, what do you want people to remember? Samuel looked at Annie, then at the black coat, then at the files. That a clean seam tells the truth, he said. Even when people don't. Annie held his hand tighter, and beside them, Richard Whitmore finally looked away. Richard looked away, but the room did not let him disappear. The reporters kept calling his name. The guests kept whispering Samuel's. The two sounds met in the glass corridor and became something Richard could not control. For years, he had understood rooms by their temperature. He knew when admiration was warming toward him, when doubt needed to be cooled, when a joke could turn a crowd against someone smaller. But this room had changed without asking his permission. His lawyer stepped close. We need to leave through the private exit. Richard kept his eyes on Samuel Carter. No. Richard, if I leave now, I look guilty. Claire turned toward him. You are worried about how you look. He gave her a sharp glance. I am worried about keeping this company from being destroyed by a live stream and a box of badly interpreted paper. Samuel closed the archive lid slowly. That box has my signature in it. Richard's mouth moved, but no answer came cleanly enough to use. Tasha shifted her phone toward Annie. Annie, what happens to the coat now? The question made everyone look at Marissa. She still wore the altered black coat as if removing it too soon would break the spell. Annie saw the pin from Eleanor's lapel holding the waist, the open shoulder, the flash of lining. It was rough. It needed finishing. But it had done what no polished garment in Richard's collection had done that night. It had told the truth, before anyone had the courage to say it out loud. It should be documented, Eleanor said. Photos from every angle. Construction notes. Time stamped. Richard laughed under his breath. For a hacked sample? Eleanor turned to him. For evidence of technique. Technique, Richard said. You people keep saying that word as if a shoulder turn is a fingerprint. Samuel looked at him. For some of us, it is. Annie felt the quiet force in her father's voice. He was not performing for the cameras. He was speaking to a man who had once stood close enough to erase him. Richard stepped toward Samuel. You want credit now? After 22 years? Is that what this is? You want your name dragged onto a company you spent decades resenting? Samuel did not step back. I wanted my name left where I put it. The answer was so simple that Richard seemed to hate it. Claire touched the box. Dad, stop talking. You don't give me instructions in my own venue. No, she said, but your lawyer should. The lawyer's face tightened. Mr. Whitmore, I strongly recommend we issue a written statement and make no additional remarks. Richard looked around. Cameras, phones, guests, staff. The older assistants who had been invisible to him all night. The younger designers who now stared at him as if seeing the machine they worked inside for the first time. He finally understood that speaking was no longer helping him. Then Marcus, the production coordinator, approached with his headset in one hand. He looked at Samuel first, not Richard. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to interrupt. Samuel seemed surprised to be addressed so carefully. Yes, the main hall is still full. People aren't leaving. They're asking to hear from you. Richard snapped. Absolutely not. Marcus did not look at him. They're asking for Annie too. Annie felt Samuel's hand tighten around hers. No, Samuel said. Annie turned to him. Dad, you've had enough for one night. So have you. That's my point. She understood him. He had spent her whole life trying to stand between her and the ruin that had found him. Even now, with proof in a box and cameras finally pointed at the right person, his first instinct was to shield her. But Annie looked back through the corridor toward the hall. The people waiting there were not all kind. Some were curious. Some wanted spectacle. Some would forget by morning if the story became inconvenient. But some were listening. And listening was something Samuel Carter had been denied for more than 20 years. "I don't want to give a speech," Annie said. "Then don't. I want them to see you." Samuel's face changed. Not much. Just enough for Annie to know the words had reached the place he kept locked. He looked toward the hall, then down at his work coat, the bent collar, the measuring tape still hanging from his pocket. "I'm not dressed for that." Annie almost smiled through the ache in her chest. "You're dressed like yourself." Eleanor nodded. "That will do." Marissa stepped forward. "I'll walk with you." Samuel looked at the coat on her shoulders. "You should take that off before someone from this house claims it again." Marissa's lips curved. "Let them try in front of all these cameras." Tasha lowered her phone slightly. "We can go in live, but only if you want it. Not because the crowd is hungry." Samuel looked at her, then at Annie. "Your mother would have hated this many cameras," Annie said. "She would have watched every second." That brought a small laugh from him, the first true sound of warmth since he walked in. Richard turned away, speaking fast to his lawyer. "If they go into that hall, we issue a cease and desist by morning." Claire heard him. "No, we won't." He faced her. "You do not speak for Whitmore House. I will speak to the board tonight. You think the board will choose you over me?" Claire glanced toward the reporters, the staff, the guests, the box. "I think the board will choose survival." Richard stared at her, and for a moment Annie saw the private cost of what Claire was doing. It was not easy to step out from under a father's shadow, even when the shadow covered someone else's grave. Marcus led the way back toward the main hall. The runway lights had softened, but the long white stage was still lit. Guests stood beside their seats, not chatting now, not sipping champagne. The luxury sheen of the evening had cracked. Underneath it were human faces, confused, angry, ashamed, alert. When Annie entered with Samuel, the sound dropped. Not complete silence, nothing that clean. Phones still buzzed. A woman whispered. A chair scraped. But the room lowered itself around him. Samuel stopped at the edge of the runway. Annie felt him hesitate. She knew why. The last time he had stood near a room like this, men with better suits had decided he did not belong in it. Now the room waited for him, and waiting could be frightening when a person had lived too long without being welcomed. She leaned close. "Just walk." He looked at her. "With you." So they walked together. Marissa followed a few steps behind in the altered coat. Eleanor came slowly with her cane. Claire carried the archive box. Tasha moved along the side aisle, filming but not crowding them. Richard stayed near the entrance, half in shadow. Annie did not look back. They reached the center of the runway, the place where Richard's models had stood minutes earlier, wearing his idea of legacy. Samuel glanced down at the white floor beneath his shoes, then at the lights. He looked uncomfortable, but not small. A woman in the front row stood and began clapping. Then an older man stood. Then 3 staff members near the back. Then the sound spread until it filled the hall. Not wild, not clean, but real. Samuel closed his eyes for 1 second. Annie saw his mouth tighten as he fought to hold himself together. When the applause softened, Tasha asked from the aisle, "Mr. Carter, would you like to say anything?" Samuel looked at the crowd. He did not reach for a microphone at first. Marcus found one and handed it to him. Samuel held it like a tool he did not trust. "I'm not a public speaker," he said. A few people smiled. No one laughed at him. "I'm a tailor. I've been one since I was younger than my daughter is now. I know cloth better than I know crowds." He paused, looking down at his hands. 22 years ago, I asked people in this industry to check the dates. That was all. Check the sketches. Check the pattern notes. Check who touched the garment before the cameras came. They didn't. The hall stayed quiet. Samuel continued. After that, work stopped coming. People stopped calling. Some crossed the street when they saw me because they didn't want to be seen with a man accused of stealing. My wife told me to keep standing. My daughter grew up watching me sit behind a shop counter with a name people had turned into a warning. Annie stared at the floor because if she looked at him too long, she would cry. Samuel's voice roughened but did not break. I don't know what the review will say. I know what I signed. I know what I made. I know what was taken. Tonight, my daughter did what I taught her. She listened to the fabric. She made it honest. He turned toward Annie then, and for a second, there was no crowd. She did not learn that in Paris. She did not learn it from a name on a door. She learned it in a little shop in Brooklyn, from work nobody clapped for. The applause came again, but Samuel lifted one hand, asking them to wait. I appreciate the noise, he said. I do. But noise is not justice. Justice is records corrected, credit restored, doors opened for the people doing the work behind them. Eleanor lowered her head. Claire held the box tighter. Samuel looked toward Richard at the back of the hall. And justice is late tonight, but late is better than buried. No one moved. Then Annie took the microphone from her father gently. My dad once told me a clean seam tells the truth even when people don't, she said. Tonight, all I did was pull one loose thread. The rest of you saw what came undone. She turned to Richard. You paid me because cameras made you keep one promise. Now keep the one this industry broke. Say his name in the records. Put it where it should have been. The room turned with her. Hundreds of eyes found Richard Whitmore again. He stood still for a long moment. Then his lawyer leaned close, whispering. Richard's face was pale, but his voice carried when he answered. Whitmore House will submit the Carter materials to independent review, he said. And if the review confirms authorship contribution, the official archive will be corrected. A voice from the crowd shouted, not if, when. Richard's mouth tightened. Samuel took the microphone back. Let the paper speak. That quieted them. It was exactly the kind of sentence Annie expected from him. Not dramatic, not polished, just honest. The crowd began clapping again, and this time Annie let herself hear it. Not as victory, not yet, as witness. Beside her, Samuel Carter stood under lights that had once belonged to someone else's story. And for the first time in 22 years, the room did not ask him to leave. The applause did not end all at once. It thinned slowly, row by row, like people were reluctant to return the room to ordinary sound. Samuel handed the microphone back to Marcus and stepped down from the runway with Annie's hand still in his. He did not look proud exactly. Pride would have been too simple. He looked like a man trying to breathe in a place where, for 22 years, the air had belonged to someone else. Reporters moved in again, but more carefully now. Tasha stayed near Annie, not blocking anyone, just close enough to make sure the camera kept recording if someone tried to change the story. Claire carried the archive box to a side table where Eleanor, Marcus, and 2 members of the venue staff stood as witnesses, while every document was photographed again under clean light. Richard's lawyer spoke on the phone near the wall. Her voice was low, but Annie caught enough. Independent review. Yes. No. We cannot retrieve the files without causing another incident. Because everyone is filming. Yes, everyone. Richard stood apart from her, staring at the runway as if the floor had betrayed him. Marissa finally stepped behind a screen and removed the altered black coat with Annie's help. She did it slowly, almost respectfully. Once it came off, Annie laid it flat on a white table. The coat looked different without Marissa inside it. Less magical perhaps, but no less honest. The open shoulder, the turned front, the quick tie at the waist, the silver lining pulled into view. Every change was visible now. Eleanor leaned over it. We need construction photos before anyone breathes near it too hard. Marissa smiled. That's the first normal thing anyone has said in an hour. Samuel stood beside Annie and looked at the coat. You cut clean. Annie glanced up at him. You already said good. I'm allowed to say it twice. That almost made her laugh. It came out as a small breath, but Samuel heard it and squeezed her shoulder. Claire approached with the top folder from the archive box. The attorney I mentioned is on her way. Her name is Denise Holloway. She handled restoration credit for 2 museum collections and a costume archive dispute. She's independent. Richard heard her and turned. You contacted outside counsel without authorization? Claire looked at him. Yes. You have no idea what you've exposed this company to. I think I'm learning. His eyes were sharp. You think the world is divided into villains and victims because tonight gave you a clean little story. It isn't. Companies survive because people make hard decisions. Samuel looked at him. You didn't make a hard decision. You made a profitable one. Richard's head turned slowly toward him. You were not owed a career. No, Samuel said, but I was owed the truth. The words were quiet enough that only the nearest people heard them, but Tasha's phone caught them. Annie saw comments flash along the screen. He said it. Truth. That man deserves justice. She looked away before the flood of strangers could become too. Denise Holloway arrived 20 minutes later in a camel coat over a black dress, hair pulled back, glasses in one hand and a leather briefcase in the other. She was in her late 50s, with the calm of someone used to entering rooms where money had already begun lying. Claire met her first. Thank you for coming. Denise looked around at the cameras, the guests still lingering. Richard's lawyer, then Annie and Samuel. I assume this is not a routine archive question. No, Samuel said. Denise's eyes moved to him with recognition but not pity. Mr. Carter, he nodded. I read about your case years ago, she said. I always thought the timeline seemed thin. Samuel's mouth tightened. Thin is one word. Denise did not apologize for having noticed too late. Annie respected that. Too many people had been apologizing with their faces while offering nothing useful. Denise pulled on a pair of gloves and examined the documents where Claire had arranged them. She did not rush. She checked the signature, the pattern notes, the memo, the Polaroids, the press draft, and the date stamps on the old workroom logs. Eleanor stood beside her, answering technical questions. This is not a full review, Denise said at last. But these materials are significant. They should be secured tonight with a chain of custody record. Copies should go to Mr. Carter's representative, Miss Whitmore, and Whitmore House Counsel. Originals should be held by a neutral third party until examined. Richard's lawyer folded her arms. We do not consent to removal of original company property. Denise looked at her. Then file an emergency motion before midnight and explain to a judge why documents connected to a public authorship dispute should be returned to the sole custody of the accused party. The lawyer said nothing. Claire almost smiled. Annie saw it and then saw the smile vanish when Richard looked at her. Denise turned to Samuel. Do you have counsel? Samuel shook his head. I had rent. The answer silenced the table. Denise closed the folder carefully. You have counsel now, if you want it. Samuel looked at Annie. She knew that look. It was the same one he gave when deciding whether to buy the better thread or the cheaper kind. Whether to fix the old steamer one more time or replace it. He was calculating cost before hope. Denise seemed to understand. We'll talk fees later. Tonight is about preservation. Samuel's shoulders dropped a fraction. Then, yes, Richard laughed softly. How noble. Everyone loves charity when cameras are rolling. Denise turned to him. Mr. Whitmore, I advise you to stop speaking without your attorney's hand over your mouth. A few people nearby went still. Marissa looked down to hide her smile. Annie watched Richard absorb the insult. He did not fire back. Not this time. The balance had changed. He could still hurt people later, perhaps. Men like him did not lose all power in one night, but he could not command this room anymore. The next hour moved in pieces. Denise photographed and cataloged the documents. Eleanor dictated a technical description of the Carter turn. Tasha saved copies of the live stream to 2 separate drives Marcus found in the media booth. Claire signed a statement confirming she retrieved the box from the Whitmore archive. Marissa signed that she had worn the altered coat and witnessed Annie's 15-second reconstruction. Annie signed nothing until Denise read every line aloud to Samuel and then to her. When the transfer receipt for the $100,000 came through again by email, Denise asked to see it. Annie opened her phone with stiff fingers. The number sat there, impossible and real. Samuel looked at it and shook his head once. That much money for being insulted? Annie said, no, for being right. He looked at her, then nodded slowly. Fair correction. It was after midnight when they finally left through the west entrance. The crowd had thinned, but a few reporters still waited in the cold. Denise handled most of the questions. Tasha promised to send Annie the full video. Claire stood near the curb, alone now. watching Richard get into a black car without looking back at her. Annie walked over. "Are you okay?" Claire gave a tired laugh. "No, me neither." "That helps," weirdly. They stood side by side for a moment. Two daughters, both carrying pieces of what their fathers had done or suffered. Claire looked at Annie. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I wasn't planning to." Claire nodded. "Good. But you opened the box. I should have opened it sooner." "You didn't know." Claire looked toward the car disappearing into traffic. "I knew enough not to ask." Annie had no soft answer for that, so she did not offer one. Her father had taught her not every tear needed a handkerchief right away. Sometimes truth deserved room to sting. Samuel called from the curb. "Annie? Train? Or cab?" Before she could answer, Denise said, "Cab. I'm paying." "Nobody carries that much history onto the subway tonight." Samuel started to object. Denise lifted one hand. "Consider it legal strategy." That settled it. In the cab, Annie sat between her father and the archive copies Denise had placed in a sealed envelope. The city moved past in streaks of yellow, red, and glass. Manhattan looked unchanged, which felt unfair. After everything, the buildings still stood, the traffic still honked, people still crossed streets with coffee cups, and no idea that Samuel Carter's name had been pulled from a basement and carried into the night. Samuel leaned back, eyes closed but not asleep. Annie watched his hands resting on his knees. "Dad? Mem, are you angry?" He opened his eyes. "Yes." "At me?" He looked at her as if the question hurt. "No, baby." She nodded but did not look away. Samuel sighed. "I'm angry it had to be you. I'm angry you had to stand in a room that ugly. I'm angry I wasn't there before he tried to make you small." "You were there," Annie said. He frowned. She tapped her temple lightly. "Here." Samuel turned toward the window. For a while, he said nothing. Then he reached over and took her hand. When they reached Brooklyn, Carter Alterations was dark except for the small light Samuel always left on above the sewing machine. He unlocked the shop and held the door for Annie. The bell gave its familiar, tired ring. Inside, everything was as it had been that morning. Thread on shelves, half-finished hems, the old Singer machine, a customer's coat waiting on a hanger. The smallness of it should have felt sad after the glass atrium. It did not. It felt true. Samuel walked to the counter and set the sealed envelope beside the register. He looked around the shop, then at Annie. "Your mother would have called every person she ever met by sunrise." Annie smiled then, properly this time. She would have started with Aunt Rochelle, and Rochelle would have told the church prayer chain before breakfast. They both laughed, tired and soft. Then Samuel sat at the sewing machine. He did not turn it on. He just rested his hand on it like a man touching the shoulder of an old friend. Annie stood beside him. For the first time in her life, Carter Alterations did not feel like the place her father had been forced to settle. It felt like the place the truth had survived. By 8 the next morning, Brooklyn already knew. Not all of Brooklyn, of course. Not the people rushing for the A train with headphones in. Not the delivery drivers double-parked outside the bakery. Not the teenagers dragging backpacks toward school with their eyes still half asleep. But the part of Brooklyn that mattered to Carter Alterations knew before Samuel even unlocked the front door. Mrs. Alvarez from the bodega was standing outside with 2 coffees in a cardboard tray and a paper bag from the bakery. Mr. Jenkins, the retired bus driver who brought his church suits in every Easter, stood beside her with his hands in his coat pockets. Miss Lorraine from the 3rd floor had her phone out. The screen paused on a clip of Annie standing on the runway beside her father. Samuel stopped with the key halfway to the lock. Mrs. Alvarez lifted the coffee tray. "Don't look at me like that, Samuel. You went viral. Viral people still need breakfast." Annie stood behind him, tired enough that her bones felt full of sand, and watched her father try to find a normal answer. "I didn't go viral," Samuel said. Miss Lorraine turned her phone toward him. "Baby, you got 3 million views before I finished my oatmeal." Mr. Jenkins nodded. "My grandson sent it to me at 6:30, said, 'Isn't this the man who fixed your blue suit?' I told him. That man made me look employable for 30 years. Samuel looked down at the sidewalk. "Y'all don't have to make a fuss." Mrs. Alvarez handed Annie a coffee. Too late. Inside the shop, the phone was already ringing. Samuel unlocked the door, and the bell over it gave its thin, familiar sound. For years, that bell had meant hems, zippers, rent money, small repairs, quiet survival. That morning, it sounded like the start of something he did not know how to receive. Annie set her coffee on the counter and answered the phone. Carter Alterations. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice said, "Is this the shop of Samuel Carter, the designer?" Annie looked at her father. He was standing by the singer machine, one hand on the back of the chair, as if the word had struck him in the chest. "Yes," Annie said. "This is his shop." By 10 o'clock, the calls had not stopped. A local news producer wanted an interview. A fashion podcast wanted Samuel for a full episode. A woman from Queens called just to say she remembered the old accusation and was sorry she had believed it. 2 former employees from the early Whitmore years left messages with shaking voices. One said, "I saw more than I said." Another said, "I still have copies of fitting notes in my storage unit." Denise Holloway called at 10:15. "Do not respond to anyone promising representation, investment, or immediate partnership," she said. "Do not sell the coat. Do not loan the coat. Do not let anyone from Whitmore House inside without me present." Samuel rubbed his forehead. "Good morning to you, too. I'm serious." "I know." "And Samuel?" "Yes?" "I spoke with a document examiner. We can begin verification this afternoon." Samuel went quiet. "That fast? That public?" After the call, Samuel sat behind the counter and stared at the sealed envelope Denise had left with them. Annie folded a customer's gray slacks because her hands needed work. The routine helped. Fold seam to seam. Match the cuffs. Smooth the fabric. Place it on the pickup shelf. Ordinary tasks made room for impossible news. At noon, a young woman pushed open the door with a winter coat missing 3 buttons. She stopped when she saw Samuel. "Oh," she said. "I'm sorry. Are you still open?" Samuel blinked, then stood. "Yes, ma'am, we're open." She came in slowly. "I saw you on the news." Annie tensed, but the woman only placed the coat on the counter. "My mother used to come here," she said. "She passed last year. You fixed the dress she wore to my brother's wedding. She said you made her feel pretty after chemo." The woman swallowed. "I just wanted you to know that." Samuel looked at the coat between them. "What do you need done?" "Buttons if you have time." "I have time." That was how the day went. The world outside demanded scandal, proof, statements, outrage. Inside Carter Alterations, people brought coats, dresses, stories. A man came in with a torn pocket and said he had worked janitorial at Whitmore House years ago and remembered Samuel being escorted out with his pattern folder. An older woman from the church brought pound cake and told Annie, "Your daddy stood tall on that stage, even if he didn't think he did." A teenager came in pretending to need a zipper fixed, then asked Annie if she really redesigned the coat in 15 seconds. "No," Annie said. The girl's face fell. "It took my whole life," Annie added. The girl smiled like she understood more than expected. By late afternoon, Denise arrived with Eleanor. Eleanor looked less formal than the night before, wearing a wool coat and flat shoes, but she carried the same careful authority. Samuel met her near the cutting table. For a moment, neither spoke. Eleanor said, "I brought copies of my statement." Samuel nodded. "Thank you." She looked at him. "I don't expect that to settle anything between us." "It doesn't." "I know." Annie watched them from the counter. There was something grown and painful in the space between them. The kind of thing younger people often wanted solved quickly so they would not have to sit with discomfort. But Samuel did not rush forgiveness, and Eleanor did not ask for it. That seemed more honest than a hug for cameras. Denise spread documents across the work table. "The review will take time, but the preliminary evidence is strong. The date stamps on the pattern notes predate the final credited sketch. The memo is damaging. The Polaroids help establish workroom presence and garment authorship contribution. And if former employees are willing to testify, Whitmore House has a serious problem." Samuel listened with his hands folded. Annie asked, "What does serious problem mean?" "It means pressure," Denise said. "Legal, public, financial. It means they may offer a settlement." Samuel's face closed slightly. "A settlement isn't a cleared name." "No," Denise said. which is why we define the demand before they define the offer. Eleanor looked at Samuel. You should ask for archive correction, public acknowledgement, and restoration of credit, wherever that collection is referenced. And an apology, Annie said. Samuel looked at her. A real one, she said. Not that hallway nonsense. Denise nodded. We can include formal public apology. Samuel took off his glasses and rubbed one lens with a cloth. 22 years ago, I would have asked for my job back. No one answered. He put the glasses back on. I don't want that now. What do you want? Denise asked. Samuel looked around the shop. At the old Singer machine, the shelves of thread, the coffee can of buttons, the customers' clothes hanging in plastic sleeves. His voice was quiet when he spoke. I want the record corrected, I want Annie's work protected, and I want every young cutter and stitcher in those rooms to know their names matter before someone takes them. Annie looked down before he could see her eyes fill. That evening, after Denise and Eleanor left, Annie and Samuel closed the shop early. Not because there was nothing to do. There was too much. Messages, calls, reporters, customers, old ghosts. But Samuel turned the sign to closed at 6 and said, Enough noise. They climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above. The place looked smaller after everything, but not poorer. The kitchen table was crowded with unopened mail, Annie's sketchbook, and the chipped blue mug Samuel used for tea. He put water on the stove while Annie checked her phone. The clip had passed 5 million views. Her name was everywhere, usually beside Richard's, sometimes beside her father's. She did not like seeing the three names together. It felt like standing too close to a man who had tried to erase them both. Samuel set a bowl of soup in front of her. You need to eat. So do you. I tasted while cooking. That's what you say when you don't eat. He gave her a look. Don't parent me. Then stop acting like me. He almost smiled. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, traffic moved along the avenue. Somewhere below, a dog barked. The apartment heater clicked on with a tired rattle. Annie finally said, Are you scared? Samuel did not pretend not to understand. Of Richard? Of Hope? She looked at him. He stirred his soup slowly. Anger is easy to carry after a while. You get used to the weight. Hope is different. It asks you to stand up again. Annie thought about the runway, the scissors, the way Richard's face changed when the room started saying Samuel's name. I don't want him to win later, she said. Samuel looked at her. Then we don't let him make this only about him. What do you mean? He nodded toward her sketchbook. You made something last night. Don't let the scandal be bigger than the work. Annie opened the sketchbook. Most pages were private things she had drawn after shifts. Coats with angled backs, dresses built from old linings, jackets inspired by women on the subway, church suits with hidden color inside the cuffs. She had never shown most of them to anyone. Samuel turned a few pages carefully. This one, he said, tapping a long coat with a split shoulder and soft waist. This is yours. It's not finished. Good. Finished things can't grow. Annie stared at the drawing. What if we made it? Samuel looked up. We, she said. Not Whitmore. Not under someone else's name. Carter. He sat back slowly. The kettle began to whistle. Neither of them moved to turn it off. Carter what? He asked. Annie looked at the sketch, then at her father's hands. Carter and daughter, she said. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the fear was still there. But something else had entered beside it. All right, he said, but we start with one clean seam. The kettle screamed until Samuel finally rose and turned off the stove. Neither of them spoke for a while after Annie said the name. Carter and daughter sat between them on the kitchen table like a garment just cut from expensive cloth. Beautiful but frightening because one wrong move could ruin it. The next morning, Samuel wrote the words on brown patterned paper with a carpenter's pencil. His handwriting was plain, steady. No flourish. Carter and daughter. Annie stood beside him, still in sweatpants, hair tied back, holding toast she had forgotten to eat. It looks too official, she said. Samuel capped the pencil. That's because it is. We don't even have a collection. We have a table, a machine. 2 hands each, and more people watching than we asked for. That is enough to begin. Not enough to brag, but enough to begin. By noon, it was no longer just an idea. Tasha posted a follow-up clip from Carter alterations, not dramatic, not polished. Samuel marking muslin on the cutting table. Annie sketching beside the old register, the altered black coat photographed in clean morning light. The caption was simple: "They're working." Within an hour, people were asking where to donate fabric, where to buy tickets, whether Carter and daughter would show in New York. Annie read the comments until Samuel took the phone from her hand. "Too much praise can bend your back, same as insult," he said. "You just made that up." Still true. The investigation moved at the same time. Denise filed notice to preserve evidence. Eleanor submitted a signed technical statement describing the Carter turn and its appearance in both Samuel's old pattern notes and Annie's live alteration. 2 former Whitmore employees agreed to speak on record. One was a cutter named Paulie Grant, now 71, and living in Queens. He told Denise over speakerphone that Samuel had been the best shoulder man in that building, and that everyone in the workroom knew Richard could not solve the white jacket without him. "Why didn't you say that then?" Samuel asked. Paulie went quiet. "I had 3 kids and a mortgage." Samuel closed his eyes. "I did too." "I know," Paulie said. "That's what kept me up last night." There was no clean answer to that. Annie sat across the table, learning that injustice rarely survived because one villain carried it alone. It survived because many people carried small pieces of silence and called them necessary. By the end of the week, Whitmore House issued its first statement. Denise read it aloud in the shop while Samuel pressed a sleeve. Whitmore House acknowledges that newly surfaced archival materials raise questions regarding the authorship history of the 2002 white jacket. "We are cooperating with an independent review and remain committed to transparency." Samuel snorted. "Transparency after 22 years in a basement." Annie looked at Denise. "Is that good?" "It's cautious," Denise said. "Cautious means scared, but not cornered." Richard released his own statement 2 hours later. He expressed regret for the hurt experienced by the Carter family and insisted that creative authorship within major fashion houses is often collaborative and complex. Samuel listened once, then turned off the video. "That man could apologize to a burning house and still blame the smoke," he said. But the pressure kept building. Fashion students began posting side-by-side images of Samuel's sketch and Richard's credited jacket. Older black designers gave interviews about how often pattern makers, cutters, and technical staff were erased by name-brand creative directors. A trade magazine ran a piece titled, "The Hands Behind the House." For the first time, people were not only asking whether Richard had lied, they were asking how many Richards the industry had protected. Carter alterations became busier and stranger. Customers still came for hems, but now they brought flowers, old stories, newspaper clippings, and once, a framed photo of Samuel from a 2001 studio holiday party that he had never seen. Annie watched her father receive each offering with politeness and discomfort. He could measure a sleeve in seconds, but he did not know what to do with admiration. One afternoon, Claire came to the shop alone. The bell rang, and the room went quiet. Mrs. Alvarez, who had been dropping off empanadas under the excuse of needing a zipper fixed, stared at her openly. Samuel looked up from the cutting table. Annie stood behind the counter. Claire held a garment bag over one arm and an envelope in the other. "I can come back," she said. Samuel shook his head. "You're here now." Claire walked to the counter and placed the envelope down. "The board voted this morning. My father has been asked to step away from creative leadership pending the review." Annie absorbed that slowly. Richard had seemed too large to be moved by anything as ordinary as a vote. Claire continued. "They'll announce it tomorrow. The official correction is still under legal review, but it's coming. Denise will get the language before release." Samuel looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "And you?" "I resigned." Annie's eyes lifted. "You did?" Claire nodded. "I should have left before someone had to drag the truth out under cameras." Samuel studied her. "What will you do?" Claire gave a small, helpless smile. "I don't know. I've never had to build anything without my last name opening the door first." Nobody rushed to comfort her. That, too, was honest. She lifted the garment bag. "There's something else. I found this in a private storage closet, separate from the archive. It should have been with the files. Samuel unzipped the bag. Inside was the white jacket. The room seemed to lose all its small sounds. The steamer, the street beyond the glass, Mrs. Alvarez's paper bag crinkling in her hands. Samuel reached out but stopped before touching it. Annie had seen the jacket in photographs. In person, it was different. Older, yes, but still clean in structure. The left shoulder carried the turn. The waist held the line. Even after 2 decades, the garment remembered him. Samuel finally touched the shoulder with 2 fingers. "That's mine," he said. Not loud, not bitter, just true. Claire's eyes filled. "I'm sorry." Samuel looked at the jacket for a long time. "I believe you are." It was not forgiveness, but it was a door cracked open. That night, Annie and Samuel worked until after midnight. The white jacket hung near the old Singer machine, not as a shrine, but as a witness. On the table lay sketches for Carter and daughter. Coats built from reclaimed wool. Dresses lined with family fabrics. Suits with hidden hand. Stitching inside the collar. Annie drew quickly. Samuel corrected gently. "Too much at the waist," he said. "You always say that. You always put too much at the waist." She erased and redrew. Marissa came by the next day for fittings, bringing coffee and 3 models willing to walk for free. Eleanor arrived with a list of retired workroom people who wanted to help. Tasha offered to film the process, but promised not to turn it into pity. Denise found a small Brooklyn art space that had a cancellation 6 months out and an owner who said, "My mother was a seamstress. Tell Mr. Carter the room is his." The collection began with 12 looks, then 14, then 16, not because they wanted more, but because people brought pieces of themselves. Mrs. Jenkins donated her late husband's wool overcoat. A church deacon brought silk ties from the 1980s. A young woman whose mother had survived cancer brought the scarf she wore during treatment and asked if it could be hidden inside a lining where only she would know. Samuel accepted each piece with the seriousness of a priest receiving testimony. Annie began to understand what Carter and daughter really was. Not revenge, not a viral brand. A record. A way of putting names back where they belonged. 3 months after the runway night, the Independent Review released its findings. Denise gathered Annie, Samuel, Eleanor, Claire, and Tasha in Carter alterations to read the final paragraph. Based on dated pattern annotations, signed workroom sketches, internal memoranda, photographic evidence, and witness testimony, the review concludes that Samuel Carter made a substantial and uncredited authorship contribution to the 2002 white jacket credited solely to Richard Whitmore. The official archive should be corrected to reflect Samuel Carter as contributing designer and technical architect of the garment. Annie stopped breathing halfway through. Samuel sat very still. Denise looked up. "There's more. Whitmore House will issue a public apology, fund a scholarship in Samuel's name for underrepresented technical designers, and include the corrected credit in all future archive and exhibition materials." Eleanor wiped her eyes without pretending otherwise. Tasha whispered, "Mr. Carter?" Samuel did not answer at first. Then he stood, walked to the front window, and looked out at Brooklyn. A bus pulled up at the curb. Mr. Alvarez was sweeping the sidewalk. A woman hurried past with a child in one hand and dry cleaning in the other. Life, ordinary and stubborn, went on. Samuel pressed one hand against the glass. "My wife should have heard this," he said. Annie went to him. "She knew. I know." His voice broke then, just a little. "But she should have heard them say it." Annie leaned her head against his shoulder. The official apology aired the next morning. Richard did not deliver it. The board chair did, with Claire standing behind her and Samuel's corrected sketch projected on the screen. Richard's absence said enough. Some people online complained that it was not enough, that nothing could repay 22 years. They were right. But when the archive page changed, when Samuel Carter's name appeared under the white jacket, Annie printed it and taped it beside the Singer machine. Samuel looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Crooked." Annie frowned. "What?" "The tape. Left side is low." She stared at him. Then they both laughed until they had to sit down. By the time the Carter and daughter show approached, the noise had changed. The scandal was still there, but it no longer led every conversation. People began asking about the work. the sketches, the reclaimed fabrics, the father and daughter building a collection in a Brooklyn alteration shop where customers still came in needing pants hemmed. On the final night before the show, Annie found Samuel alone in the shop, standing before the finished pieces. 16 garments hung in a quiet row. Each carried a small tag inside with the name of the person whose fabric or story had become part of it. "You okay?" she asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "You ask me that a lot now. You avoid answering a lot now." He touched the sleeve of the final coat, the one inspired by the 15-second alteration. Black wool, silver lining, cleaner now, deeper, with the Carter turn at the shoulder and Annie's sharper line through the back. "I'm afraid," he said. Annie waited. "Not of Richard. Not anymore. I'm afraid of walking out and wanting it too much." The applause? The life that might have been? Annie moved beside him. "Maybe tomorrow isn't about that life. What is it about?" She looked at the row of garments, then at the old Singer machine, then at the taped archive correction by the wall. "This one," she said, "the life that stayed." Samuel nodded slowly. Outside, Brooklyn settled into evening. Inside Carter alterations, father and daughter stood among 16 garments, each one cut from proof, grief, humor, labor, and names that had waited long enough. The truth had not fixed everything, but it had been stitched back where it belonged. The Brooklyn art space used to be a furniture warehouse, and nobody had tried too hard to hide it. The brick walls still showed old nail marks. The floor had scratches that no polish could erase. Pipes crossed the ceiling above rows of folding chairs borrowed from a church 2 blocks away. It was not the glass atrium. There were no champagne towers, no white carpet, no silent staff paid to make wealth look effortless. There was coffee in paper cups, pound cake wrapped in foil, children sitting cross-legged near the back, and neighbors greeting each other like Sunday service had wandered into a fashion show. Annie stood behind a black curtain made from 2 bolts of fabric Mrs. Alvarez had found in her cousin's basement. Her hands were cold, so she kept rubbing her fingers together, thumb against forefinger, the way her father did before threading a needle. Samuel noticed. "You'll burn a hole through your skin doing that." "I'm fine." "You're lying. You're hovering. I'm your father. That's my job." She looked at him then and almost forgot to be nervous. He wore the suit she had made for him. Deep charcoal wool with a soft shoulder, and a narrow line through the waist. Inside the collar, where only he knew to look, she had stitched the words, "The truth was never stolen." He had pretended not to cry when he first saw it. Annie had pretended not to notice. "You ready?" she asked. Samuel looked past her at the row of garments waiting on the rack. 16 looks, 16 stories. Reclaimed wool, church satin, old silk ties, a widow's scarf hidden inside a lining, a retired bus driver's overcoat turned into a woman's long jacket, silver thread running through black cloth like light refusing to stay buried. "No," he said. Annie nodded. "Good. Sure, people usually ruin clothes." Samuel blinked, then smiled because he recognized Marissa's line. "You getting smart with me on show night? Trying to stay alive." "You are alive," he said, and his voice softened. "That's the point." Outside the curtain, the room filled past capacity. Eleanor sat in the front row with her cane across her lap. Tasha stood near the aisle with one camera on a tripod and one phone in her hand, filming but not crowding the moment. Denise Holloway sat beside 2 young law students she had brought because, as she told Samuel, they need to see what credit restoration looks like when it has a human face. Claire arrived quietly, wearing a plain navy dress and no Whitmore badge. She sat near the side, not in the front, not hiding either. Richard Whitmore was not there. His name appeared nowhere on the program. The city had not forgotten him, and the industry had not finished deciding what to do with him, but that night did not belong to his absence. Marcus, now freelancing and looking happier without a headset, stepped to the front and tapped the microphone. It squealed once. People laughed. He laughed too. "Sorry," he said. "Fancy room, cheap mic." That broke the tension. He glanced toward the curtain. "Welcome to Carter and Daughter." The applause started before the first model walked. Annie closed her eyes. Samuel touched her shoulder once. The first look was simple. A black coat with a turned shoulder, silver lining visible only when the model moved. It was inspired by the 15-second coat but finished with patience. When Marissa stepped out wearing it, the room went quiet in the best way. She walked like she had nothing to prove and no one to fear. At the end of the runway, she turned, and the lining flashed. People understood. Some had seen the clip. Some had heard the story. But seeing the garment whole, finished, no longer fighting for permission to exist, was different. Then came the others. A cream dress lined with blue church satin. A men's jacket made from Mr. Jenkins's old bus driver coat. The cuff embroidered with his route number. A gown built from donated silk ties, each one from a man who had worn them to work, weddings, funerals, job interviews, court dates, and Sunday mornings. A child in the back whispered, "That one looks like a story." And an older woman near him said, "That's because it is." Annie watched from behind the curtain, counting steps, checking hems, catching pins, breathing only when each model returned safely. Samuel watched differently. He watched the shoulders, the backs, the way cloth met the body. But once in a while, Annie saw him look at the audience instead. He seemed surprised every time they leaned forward. The final look waited at the end of the rack. It was not the white jacket from the archive. Samuel had refused to remake it. "That belongs to the record," he had said, "not the future." Instead, the final garment was a coat Annie and Samuel had built together from black wool and a narrow panel of white fabric inside the back, visible only when the wearer turned. The shoulder carried Samuel's line. The back carried Annie's sharper cut. Inside the hem were stitched the names of everyone who had contributed fabric, testimony, time, or courage. Marissa did not wear the final piece. Samuel did. When Annie helped him into it, his hands trembled. "Dad, I'm all right. You don't have to do this." He looked at her. "Yes, I do." The music softened. Not dramatic, just a low blend of piano and old soul, the kind Samuel used to play on the shop radio while working late. Annie stepped through the curtain first. The room stood before she reached the middle of the runway. Then Samuel came out. For a second, he looked at the standing crowd and almost stopped. Annie reached back without turning. His hand found hers. Together, they walked to the end of the runway. The applause rose around them, not polished, not polite, not bought. It had rough edges. People shouted his name. Some shouted Annie's. Mrs. Alvarez waved a handkerchief like she was at a graduation. Mr. Jenkins clapped with both hands above his head. Eleanor did not clap at first. She stood with one hand pressed to her mouth, then finally brought her palms together slowly, as if each sound was an apology and a witness. Samuel looked at Annie. "Your mother would have made too much noise. She would have brought a bell. She had one. She'd use it." He laughed then, a real laugh. And the crowd heard it. That sound did something applause had not. It let people see the man behind the scandal, behind the restored credit, behind the old pain. A father, laughing with his daughter under lights he had once been denied. Marcus brought them the microphone. Annie tried to hand it to Samuel, but he shook his head. "You first." She took it and looked at the room. All week she had imagined a speech. In her head it had been sharp, perfect, maybe even brave. Now none of it felt right. "My father says finished things can't grow," she said. "So this isn't a finished story." His name was corrected in an archive, and that matters. Whitmore House funded a scholarship, and that matters too. But there are still people in back rooms whose names are missing from the work they keep alive. Cutters, stitchers, pressers, pattern makers, assistants, people who get called temporary while their work becomes permanent. She paused, finding Samuel's eyes. "This collection is called Carter and Daughter because he gave me more than skill. He gave me a way to see what others throw away and ask what it could become." She handed him the microphone. Samuel held it low for a moment. "I used to think justice would feel cleaner," he said. "It doesn't. It comes late. It comes with paperwork. It comes after people you love already carried too much. But late justice can still open a door for somebody else." The room was still. He looked at the children sitting near the back. "So if you make things, sign your work. If you help make things, ask whose name gets remembered. And if you see someone being erased, don't wait 22 years to say you saw them." He gave the microphone back to Marcus. The applause came again, and this time Samuel did not close his eyes against it. He stood beside Annie and let it reach him. After the show, people crowded the floor. Not buyers first, not reporters first, neighbors came first. Mrs. Alvarez hugged Annie too tightly. Mr. Jenkins told Samuel the bus driver coat looked better than when the city issued it. Claire approached last, holding a small card. It's for the scholarship fund, she told Samuel. The first recipient is a technical design student from Queens. Her mother is a dry cleaner. Samuel took the card. Good, Claire nodded. I thought you should know. I'm glad you told me. It was enough for that night. Later, when most guests had left and folding chairs were being stacked, Annie found a girl standing near the runway with a sketchbook hugged to her chest. She was maybe 11, black, with purple beads at the ends of her braids. Are you Annie Carter? The girl asked. Annie smiled. I am. The girl held out the sketchbook. Do you think someone like me could learn to design? Annie looked toward Samuel. He was across the room, helping Marcus fold the black curtain even though everyone kept telling him not to lift anything in his good suit. Then she looked back at the girl. Start with one clean seam, Annie said, and put your name on it. The girl nodded like she had been handed something important. Annie watched her run back to her mother, sketchbook tight against her chest. Then she turned and saw Samuel looking at her. He did not say anything. He only smiled, the small, proud smile she had known all her life, the one that had survived basements, lies, rent notices, and years of being called what he was not. Some people steal fabric, some people steal credit. Some people, if given enough silence, will try to steal an entire life. But every lie has a loose thread. Annie Carter had found one, pulled it, and watched a name come free. And in a room full of ordinary people, under lights borrowed for one night, a father and daughter began again. The lesson of Annie Carter's story is that true talent can be ignored, mocked, or buried, but it cannot be erased forever. People in power may steal credit, rewrite history, or make the weak feel invisible, yet the truth always leaves a trace. Annie's courage reminds us not to judge anyone by their job title, clothes, age, race, or place in the room. Behind every quiet worker may be a gift the world has not bothered to see. Most of all, the story teaches that justice may arrive late, but when someone is brave enough to pull the first loose thread, an entire lie can finally come undone. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.